Westlake being appointed as the preferred candidate for a non-exec director. He did phone, I had 2 interviews with him, and after he started in role and disclosed that he was dying, he contacted me, this was during the election campaign, to explain to me that he would be unlikely to continue and that he was determined to get to the bottom of things. Unfortunately, he was never able to have any more meetings.
Thank you. Councillor Phipps.
As everyone else seems to be mentioning in there about elections, Christchurch Independents did say that we would like to see Future Places closed down, and that was in our literature that we put out at election time. So I thought I'd better declare it as everybody else is.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to declare any? Councillor Batch.
Well, not so much a declaration. It's refreshing to hear everybody's point of view and what they did and didn't do. Had I known this was going to be a question, I would have sought advice from our monitoring officer and had a long discussion with him about, I've been a councillor 26 years, so I have what knowledge I do have and what knowledge I don't have, what emails I have, etc., to be able to give you an answer. So I don't really know. So I suppose, just to be safe, I will declare an interest of something which I cannot categorise. But I think in future, Madam Chairman, with respect, if you would like this sort of declaration to be made, if you could give us some notification, then I think everybody would be better served in the public interest. Thank you.
Yes, of course. And to be clear, I'm not putting you on the spot for any particular information. It's not a pecuniary interest. It's just for the interest of transparency. I think it's useful for us all to state where we stood. Would anybody like to confirm any relationships they have with any of the Future Places staff, or any interactions they have with Future Places staff that might be relevant? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really refreshing, actually, to have this conversation, so I really welcome it. Just to say that I'm not aware that I have any interests whatsoever. I'm a new councillor as well, elected in 2023 in the by-election, and then I found myself on this committee, which I've been on for the last 2 years. There wasn't, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't anything within our Green Party manifesto. We don't have a manifesto because we are very responsive to what residents bring to us on doorsteps. The only commitment that we did make as a group was that we were about transparent, open council. That's all there is to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councillor Cox online. Would you like to come in now?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not declaring an interest because I'm not on the committee, but I do want to correct a bit of declaration that has been made. I think Councillor Slade actually said that it was in our manifesto that we would be closing Future Places, and I'm just reading what was in there, and we do actually say refocus Future Places on a smaller number of strategic sites for regeneration and only widen if results are delivered. So I don't believe we actually said we would close Future Places in our manifesto. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Slade.
Happy to be corrected with what was in the manifesto, but I think in my initial speech I was very clear about the direction that we were going in. I didn't write the manifesto, that was my colleague, Councillor Earl.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, shall we move on? Councillor Lenovo.
I would also like to say I wasn't a councillor during the period that Future Places was in existence, and became a councillor in 2023. And I would have, I did vote for the closure of Future Places based on what was presented to us at that time. Thank you.
Councillor Beasley, I think you're the only one not to speak yet. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, it's most unusual under declarations for everybody to want to make a declaration, however spurious that may be. You said a moment ago that anybody who's had any dealings with anybody to do with Future Places should be making a declaration. That's a synopsis of what I think you said just now. And whether that was to provoke a response from me or not, I don't know. Yes, I have. I've had a lot of people contact me. I've had former officers of the company contact me, as you very well know. And as you have very directly referenced in your email to members of this committee, the email that you sent out at 16:59 this afternoon, and I take exception to what you have said in the opening paragraph, as you well know, and I think it's outrageous that you have written that and you've circulated it to everybody, because it couldn't be further from the truth. And I'm extremely upset about it, actually, and contemplated not staying for the meeting. So, have other people contacted me from the company? Yes, they have. Have people from outside of the company contacted me who may have an interest as ex-employees of BCP Council? Yes, they have. And I've collated that because I think that I needed to do so. And I have tried to reference that in the email that I sent earlier today at 13:57 to all members of the committee, which is the one you're responding to. And I put in there some issues which I think are grossly unfair to those who have not had input into the report. I hadn't intended this to become public. I've done it privately within the committee because I thought that is what we were charged with doing. You are the one who has opened it up, and thereby I'm making that, if that's a declaration, that's a declaration. But I do think that it is quite misleading to even make that suggestion to other members of the committee. This has become hugely toxic, hugely political, and I do not think he's going to get to the truth of what actually occurred, particularly how it was driven by the shareholders' representative. And I think that is the crucial issue which really is not being addressed.
Thank you. And just for clarity, I think the sentence that you're referring to, as I said earlier, that I would be extremely disappointed if you were to facilitate sidetracking or attempts to influence the committee. So I have not said that I believe you're doing so, but I'm anxious that none of us do so. So I wanted to be clear on the where we are coming from with respect to this debate. And as I said before, it's not. I'm not saying that these are declarations of interest. They're not pecuniary interests. This is just declaring for transparency where we're coming at from our lines of questioning.
Could I have the right to reply to that,
Yes,
please,
of course.
Chair? The very fact that you have said that you will be disappointed references something underlying in there which I find quite offensive. You know jolly well what you're saying and how you're saying it. I've got no doubt about that whatsoever. And I think, Chair, coming from you to all members of this committee, that was the wrong thing to do. And the implications I take as being offensive towards me, and they're quite unjustified.
Noted. And I think with that we will move on.
Madam Chair, if I may, please. With respect, I'd like to read the paragraph out, which is concerning Councillor Beasley and certainly concerned me. We all need to come to this table with clean hands, and I think this has certainly put a different slant on this. I was shocked to receive it. I think other people may have been concerned about some of the verbiage and its implications. And what you actually said was, Dear Councillor Beasley, I and other members of the committee have received numerous emails passing on particular narratives from the former FPL MD and co. I am concerned that this is a blatant attempt on their part to sidetrack this investigation, and I'd be extremely disappointed if you were to facilitate such sidetracking or attempts to influence the committee. So by association, you clearly stated that you believe that to be the case, and this is concerning for me. And we're being open, it's now in the public domain, and I just think as chairman that was a poor choice and your verbiage was badly chosen. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Noted. I think for context, the proposal was that the public meeting this evening should not go ahead. And I think that's important context because I do feel very strongly that it should go ahead, and I'm glad we're doing so. Councillor Tarling.
Thank you. Yes, we have received a number of emails. All the committee members, I believe, have received a number of emails from interested parties that are not in the council and either officers or current members of this council. I have chosen to ignore, for the large part, most of those messages, and I do respect the fact you know, as chair of this committee, had the right to remind members of this committee that the information we are judging the investigation onto future places is the information that's produced by our own internal audit, not the various other people outside of the process. So I don't, whether how it's worded doesn't really bother me. I'm happy that you reminded us all of that role and position.
Thank you. Councillor Slade.
Chair, in answer to your question about any former relationships, I'm going to be very clear. I do not consider this to be a relationship of any kind. But during the election campaign, myself and Councillor Cox were taken for coffee or a drink, I can't recall which, by an employee of Future Places in an attempt to try and help us understand a bit better what they were doing, because we've been very clear about our concerns. And so he felt the need to set the record straight outside of work, and we had a drink. I don't recall if we bought our own drinks or not, but as I don't drink, it would have only been a Coca-Cola anyway.
Thank you very much. Okay, shall we move on to public issues? So, there are 3 public questions for this meeting listed as follows. Question from Mr. Alex McKinstry. Would you like to come up to the table?
Okay, can you hear me, Chair, and am I using the correct microphone?
Yes and yes.
You can, excellent, okay. First question, using PDF pagination, pages 50 to 51 describe how a friendship was alleged to exist between Drew Mellor and the Future Places Strategic Engagement Director, both of whom are involved in a local rugby club. But at paragraph 3.128, a former employee of Future Places is quoted who states it was the chairing of the pool bid by the person concerned that was thought to have impressed the Future Places managing director. For absolute clarity, was that former employee of Future Places the strategic engagement director himself, or one of the executive directors of the company, and if so, which? Can you also confirm whether the ex-managing director of Future Places has actually been asked why she recommended this person for the post of strategic engagement director in her email of the 9th of July 2021?
Thank you. The former employee of Future Places Limited mentioned in the report was not the Strategic Engagement Director or either of the Executive Directors. The ex-Managing Director has not been asked any questions in this part of the investigation, including why she appointed the Strategic Engagement Director. It will be for the A&G Committee to determine next steps, including whether any individual is asked for specific comments or is asked to respond to a specific question.
Okay, thank you for that. Second question, when assessing the value of work proposed to be transferred to BCP Council, for which see pages 75 to 76, did the fact that a significant amount of that work remained in draft have any effect on its value or its categorisation? We know, for instance, that much of the Wessex Fields work remained in draft, as stated at the Overview and Scrutiny Board 26th of February 2024, while an FOI has shown that of the 27 reports commissioned for the Holes Bay site, 21 remained in draft, including an estate management plan and flood risk assessments. As the head of all, I beg your pardon, that was the original wording, I did change it. Has any opinion been reached as to why so much of the Future Places work was being kept in draft form?
It seems simply the case that for contributing work, plans, assessments and so on to an outline business case or final report presented to the Council, then these were marked as draft by Future Places Limited. In assessing the value of work to be purchased by the Council in the lead up to the closure of Future Places Limited, all work was simply categorised as work in progress, and each piece of work, plan or assessment was considered on a case-by-case basis as of use to the Council.
Okay, have any of the following, have the following documents mentioned in tonight's report been made available to the committee, given that they're not included in the Part E appendices? The documents are paragraph 316, Managing Director and Head of Human Resources emails discussing offer expectations, 11th of June 2021. 317 and 318, emails concerning Managing Director recruitment. 3117, Managing Director suggesting individuals for the Chief Ops Officer and Strategic Engagement Director roles. That was sent on 9th of July 2021. And 3211, latest position re outstanding governance documents. Can you also confirm what exactly is being quoted from in paragraph 3 to 11? It seems to be a council email. And provide dates for the emails in paragraph 3122, where the managing director quotes Graham Farrant's view that key roles must be openly recruited, and the lower part of page 105, which is legal advice.
Several hundred emails and numerous documents have been considered during the investigation. The investigator has considered it not practical to attach every email or document mentioned in the report and has exercised judgment. The committee has not seen the emails or documents mentioned in this public question. At 3.2.11, a briefing note is quoted, which was sent from an officer within the council's commissioning team to the chief executive as shareholder representative. The briefing note was sent on the 19th of March 2023. The date for the email quoted at 3.1.22, Graham Farrant's view was that key roles must be openly recruited, and that the date for that was 6th of September 2021. The date for the email quoting legal advice was the 2nd of June 2021. Please note these dates have been added to the report and will appear in the final version. Okay, there are 6 public statements for this meeting, listed as follows in date receipt order. And I understand Mr. McKinstry is going to read them for Mr. Redman as well as yourself.
I've got 2 and Mr. Redman has 3 because I withdrew the second statement. So which do you want first?
Up to you. Do yours
Okay,
first.
well, in order then. The ones I've got on my phone in order. Begin with my own statement. So this is statement 1 from me. I'm appalled at the events chronicled in 3.1 of tonight's report. Senior officers reverse engineering an appointment to a £150,000 a year publicly funded role. Especially shocking was the appointing of Drew Mellor to the interview panel as a decision maker, given that the officer arranging that panel knew of the alleged offer Drew Mellor had made to the candidate, as stated in their email to the Chief Executive on 14th of June 2021. This is crucial, as the decision to appoint was split 2-1. I note too that 8 days after the interview, the candidate was nominating individuals for the COO and Strategic Engagement Director roles. Quote, I would like to discuss how we get these in place ASAP, and they were indeed recruited after very limited advertising. The committee might seek advice on whether these appointment processes were actually lawful. Second statement from me, the 2022 business update, quote, proposed that Future Places adopts the stewardship kite mark, unquote. This kite mark being the work of the Stewardship Initiative, of which the Future Places Managing Director is co-founder. See paragraph 4.1.12. I'm alarmed that £20,125 was paid to Knight Frank for a commercial review of the stewardship model, especially as a second co-founder of the initiative was a senior partner in Knight Frank. The third co-founder was a senior executive at the Prince's Foundation, which received £77,499 from Future Places, according to the consultancy fees drill down in paragraph 416. Knight Frank, meanwhile, received sums totalling £109,126. It may well be that the Stewardship Initiative didn't benefit from Knight Frank's review, that the latter was scrupulously impartial, and that any overlapping interests were declared. But I feel the committee needs to look into this. The statements from Mr. Redman are as follows. First statement. Future Places turned out to be a total misnomer. £7,205,442 was spent on a company whose worthwhile output consisted of reports worth £1,703,420, which for some reason the council paid £2,691,704 for, plus VAT. Adding up the salary and bonus payments, moreover, and the £95,110 paid to her or her company as consultant stroke subcontractor, the managing director made £424,409 out of the company before tax, the chief ops officer £395,939. The amount paid to consultants was £3,146,410, which is staggering considering only 5 of the company's projects reached the outline business case stage. I eagerly await part 2 of the report, including details of how much rent was paid to Hinton Road Investment Limited after Drew Mellor became sole director of that company. Mr. Redmond's second statement. If the committee decides further investigations are necessary, the obvious matters are the events following the head of HR's email to Graham Farrant, 14th of June 2021, where, to quote the report, the council would appear to have been acting reactively to the leader's apparent offer of employment and the individual's expectations in terms of salary, unquote. The role was not advertised, no other candidate interviewed, and incredibly, the head of HR put Drew Mellor on the interview panel despite knowing about the aforesaid offer of employment. Graham Farrant attended the interview. He also knew. Once appointed, the managing director suggested candidates for the other 2 senior posts, and these were only advertised superficially. This was no way to recruit world-beating talent, and it's regrettable that tonight's meeting was deferred until after Graham Farrant's retirement, as in these matters, he has some very serious questions to answer. Final statement from Mr. Redmond. Extracts from the risk assessment, which was part of the officer decision record signed by Graham Farrant, 8th of June 2021. It is all in quotes. Project risks will be reported through the gateway process and by regular progress reports. These will be escalated to the heads of service or directors where appropriate. Poor performance and lack of delivery will impact negatively on the council's reputation, and this risk will be mitigated by monitoring of the urban regeneration company activities by a robust client commissioning team, unquote. Senior council officers knew the risk of failure in June 2021 and appear to have done nothing to prevent millions being squandered.
Thank you very much for those, Mr. McKinstry. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 things to ask from Democratic Services. Please could members of the committee be supplied with the responses to the questions along with the questions so they tie in. And secondly, in the email that was sent out earlier amongst the public statements, I think the last 2 aren't on here or are not complete. They're certainly not on the version I've got. I wondered if those could be sent out also, please.
I sent it out just before the meeting, yes, certainly.
Okay, so item 5 is the exclusion of public and press. So the committee, as you know, if we wish to discuss the confidential section F of the report, it will be necessary to pass a resolution. But I think useful for the public to know the content of the confidential information. And it's 2 pages, and it is simply 3 screen grabs of websites, each of them from a public domain. And what they do is they support an assertion in the report that the Future Places managing director and Koo knew each other in 2020. And the reason for excluding them is simply to respect the privacy of other individuals listed on those websites. But I think I hope you will agree that that is a very sparing use of confidential of exclusion of public and press, and I congratulate Mr. Sannard on making sure that there's so little that has been exempt from this report. So moving on to item 6, I don't need to read out that resolution unless we do go into exempt session. Is that right, Councillor Butt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm reading the statement which we've been sent, but Mr. McKinstry's statement seems so much longer than what was actually on the written page. Seemed a lot more information what Mr. McKinstry has just told us, and in fact what the statement which is printed. Is it just me? We've got a 1 paragraph of the statements, and that last statement was extremely long and had more information in it than I seem to have seen in the text.
Thank you for noting that. That's not something that jumped out to me from following it.
I'm just
but not-
trying to remember
not
some of the
disputing.
verbiage from Mr. McKinstry and the information he was giving this committee, and it's certainly not reflected in the short statements which I see in front of me. So I was just wondering, Mr. McKinstry obviously is entitled to make a statement, but I was wondering whether we could have copies of those full statements, because there was a lot of information in there which is pertinent.
Can I ask Democratic Services pick this up for afterwards to confirm
Thank you,
how
Madam
what
Chairman.
was in the pub, what was said, and it's all recorded now. We can see what was said and how that compared. Would that be a useful follow up?
No problem.
Thank you. Okay, shall we move on to the item 6, which is part A? So I have some opening remarks. I think we will take a decision at the end to note the part A of the report. So I've just got some opening remarks on how I think it would be useful to progress the meeting, and then we'll kick off. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Mr. Stannard. I think this is a very impressive piece of work, very lengthy and quite painstakingly substantiated. So I appreciate that. I want to also thank the members of the public that have been in touch with their FOIs and with suggesting specific lines of inquiry. Now, for an update for the benefit of the public, at our last meeting, we decided that we would hold an interim meeting in August to enable us to ask questions of the outgoing CEO before he retired. Now, unfortunately for our investigation, Phil Broadhead announced that he would be standing down as a councillor and moving to Dubai, and the timing of his by-election was precisely such that we had to cancel that meeting with the CEO before he left, given the councillor's advice we received around the pre-election period. So we were not able to hear his input. In the timeline we had planned, the former chief executive would have been available to give his input into the discussion, as he normally would. Given he cannot be with us, we asked him to share his comments on the scope items with the lead investigator before he left, in case they could be helpful. In the interest of balance, I also asked Phil Broadhead via email if he would do the same and comment on the scope items, as we would have expected him to be here when we started this process. I have not received a response from him to date, but perhaps Councillor Beasley could inquire from him if he intends to, if he still has a line of connection there. So as a result, we are moving straight to the discussion of the final report.
So, sorry, Chair, to intervene.
Yes, of course.
What exactly is it you're asking me to do? Because you moved very quickly there.
Philip Broadhead, I wrote to him asking if he would like to submit any comments on the scope items. You provided me with his with a contact for him.
Yes, you didn't provide me with a copy of your email, so I'm unaware of what you said to him.
Okay, I can send that, but I did send him, as I said I would to you all, I sent him the scope and invited him to provide comments, and the offer still stands to him if he would like to do so before the next meeting.
Right, well, I'm not here to speak for Phil Broadhead, nor am I here to speak for Drew Mellor, frankly.
No.
But if I can help facilitate it, obviously I will, but you need to forward me that email so that I can do so.
Yep. Happy to do so, thank you. So you'll see that it is a lengthy piece of work, and I believe I have support from colleagues for our decision to split it into 2 meetings and 2 parts. I think that this is the appropriate way to do it, given the size of the report, and to allow sufficient time to debate and really get to the bottom of these topics. And it also allows for follow-up information to be sought. The Part A is not finalised until Part B is also published, so there'll be the opportunity to add between now and then. So with that, I hope Part B to be discussed in late October, so we can decide by email between us on an appropriate date for that. I think it's useful to point out that I think that it's important to reference that Mr. Stannard has really tried throughout that report to avoid giving his opinion throughout and stating what he has found. And it's my view that that's what he has done throughout. And I want to emphasise that we're not here to grill him on his views and his opinion, because he studiously avoids doing that as far as possible. So in our discussion today, he can help point to what he's found, provide clarity, take away questions for further work, but we won't be putting him on the spot for his opinion. So instead, I propose that we work our way through the scope subsections, pause to share our reflections on what we've learnt from those sections, ask for clarity where needed, and consider whether we believe we have a reasonable picture of what took place or if we wish to request further work. So I'm going to try to keep the discussion to those sections of the scope. And so some of the issues such as bonuses, rent payment, decision to close future places, we can cover at the next meeting. And at the next meeting, I believe we should have a discussion of what to do next, recommendations to make, what else we want to do as a committee. I think it'll be useful to have that discussion once we've seen the full report. So that can, as we go through, I think we can make a note of what we would like to learn, but we'll have a full discussion on how to tackle that at the next meeting. I think it's worth commenting that as we go through, I think we should challenge ourselves as to the purpose and what we expect to achieve with this work. There's always going to be possible to do more digging into the minutiae. And so in my line of work, when we do a piece of investigative work, it's considered good practice to periodically ask ourselves whether we've learnt enough to get what we need to know, or whether we can justify the expense of digging further. So I think we have the reality that whilst things might not have gone as we wanted them to go, that doesn't necessarily mean anything illegal or if there are going to be consequences. So I just want to keep our minds focused on making sure that we have constructive recommendations on what happens or what we can do next. So another idea I had was that we might consider at the close of the next meeting, each provide a summary statement on our views of what happened. So I thought about us trying together to come up with a statement on our reflections on the report. I think that might be too challenging. So I wonder if instead we might each set out our reflections having read the report in full for the public. And I think that would demonstrate to the public the different perspectives. So that's one to think about. I'm not just going to propose we do that now, but it's one to think about for the next meeting. Councillor
Again,
Dunn.
Madam Chair, I take it that's for the next meeting, because if we're going to be versed with homework, we really do need to have, and also as to whether that's appropriate. It may be that some people around this table don't feel that's appropriate. So I don't think that any impact or any inference should be taken if somebody doesn't feel that they sit there and they give their cognitive bias as to what it may or may not have been with regard to this. So I think that people need to be able to materially rely on that and not be judged if they don't wish to give a summary of their feelings. I think that's extremely important. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I think that's completely fair. So I think I just want to kind of give councillors an opportunity to give kind of wrapping up comments, having the benefit of the full 2 discussions and the report. I think that might be a useful conclusion to that debate, but we can talk about that at the next meeting. And I think as a hook for that, the timeline in item 1.1 for the scope, we've got the 2 timelines, the future places timeline, the BCP timeline. I think that would be a useful prompt for that final wrapping up discussion. So I'll pause there before we move on to going through the scope subsections one at a time. Good. Okay, so item 1.1. Produce the timeline of key decisions in respect of BCP future places as per the MO report to A&G in March. So thank you for setting this out. I found the timeline very helpful to help get my head around the many events. And I think we can use that as the basis for, we can jump back and forward to that throughout as we go along. And we can use that as the basis for our closing discussion. So would any committee members like to comment on the tables and whether or not you believe they reflect the key events we would like to see in them? Or any wider comments about the timeline at this stage? Councillor Butt.
None other than we are at the mercy and the professional ability of whoever created this. I can't create this table. I can't check to see whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent. It'd take me months, and I don't have that capacity or that ability. So I think that unless there's some glaring gaps, omissions, or errors, we do need to take this as read and as a basis on which to start today's discussions upon. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Tarling.
I'd agree with Councillor Butt. It's a lot of work to do, and that's why I think we have to acknowledge the work that our officers have done in putting this together. But it's mostly a matter of public record, so therefore it is stuff that we could find out. And I have cross-checked not everything, I have to say, because we've only got 24 hours in a day. But I have opened some of the links. I have read some of the reports, and I found that they all work. From my knowledge, again, I wasn't a councillor at the start of this process, the timeline seems to follow through. So I'm confident that it follows my knowledge of the events.
If I may come back on that, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Tarling. Yes, I would agree. We were all able to view the links, and I'm sure we all did, and those in their entirety do cross-reference to actually what's in the box. And then the executive summary, so to speak, which is a neat box, does seem to reflect the larger piece of work that it's pointed to. So I think with regard to, does this reflect the information which has been gleaned as correct? Yes, it does. But if there's any other information, I don't think I would be aware of what it was, as I don't believe anybody else was. So we're relying upon the professional capacity of Mr. Stannard, of which I have every confidence. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. So I envisage we can return to the timeline discussion throughout. It's a useful basis for the discussion. So thank you for putting that together. And as I said before, we can add to that with it from the discussion or any extra lines of inquiry. We can always add to it as we want. So subsection 1.2. Find and restate the motivations and considerations behind the decision to create a URC and the environment for decision making in which it was created. Does anyone have any observations they'd like to make about the motivations behind setting it up, as is evident from the report? Councillor Tarling.
Sorry, Madam Chair, could you just give us page references when you do this? Because I must admit, I'm scrolling like mad. And
page 27.
Thank you.
I did have my hand up to comment on the timeline.
Apologies.
If that's okay. Sorry, I won't hold you up too long. The one observation I had, and I did go through it all and check what I could, was I would actually quite like to see, I don't know what you call it, the Janey report, you know, the massive one that we all had a few months ago. I think that would fit perfectly at the end and the end of the timeline to show that that's why we have that timeline, because it fits exactly with the Janey report and shows that action was taken. There was clear action by this committee. That would be my only request. Otherwise, I was quite happy with what I read through, and I checked where I could.
Thank you. Perhaps Mr. Stannard, if you could reflect on that. Any comments on the motivation behind setting up a URC? Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose my concern on this one is if you look at 1.2.1, which is the summary of the Cabinet report in March 2021, which states the internal management of site delivery is too small in scale to deliver the ambition set out in the big plan, which indicates the motivation. I think there's the only thing that I think has to be said and is missed somewhere is that at no point did the council ratify the big plan. The big plan was something which kept being talked about, but never actually went through a scrutiny process or approval. It just appeared and became de facto what was going to happen. So I think there is it was clear what the motivations were, but it wasn't clear there was evidence behind the motivation. But I think that has to be stated because there was no big plan ever agreed by this council.
Madam Chairman, I'm not disagreeing with Councillor Slade. Just I'm very deaf in my left ear. I can't wear the earphones because of neural issues. I would really ask people to speak up. I heard most of what Councillor Slade said, but if you turn your head, I just can't hear you. So could you please speak very clearly for me? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a helpful contribution. I mean, I think this gives a useful picture of the thinking. I think that if we're giving them credit for the what they had in mind, you can see the evolution of the thinking and the need to expand. I mean, I would have some questions on how thorough was the assessment of the capability within BCP and whether or not that was explored to its full potential, or whether there was a kind of desire to do something like this already. I think they had a clear vision for what they wanted, and they thought that the ambitions couldn't be met from within the council. I mean, I tend to be of the view that if it were easy to do things faster and cheaper and better, then that might have been done more already. So perhaps I was a bit cynical. So I think I probably would have imagined you'd be more cautious if you were trying something a bit different. But I think you can see where they were coming at it from. do we think we need to know more on this topic, on where they were coming from? Do you think it gives a good picture there of the rationale? I think so too. I mean, being cynical, I think some of the attraction was the process of having the URC in and of itself. But I suppose that's being subjective. So, do we have any observations on the motivations, or should we move on to number 2, reviewing the decision to create future places? Okay, so I'm on page 29, 2.1. Review the authority of Cabinet to establish an urban regeneration company in line with the Council's constitution, and did the report set out the risks, rewards, pros and cons? My reflections on this part was that I actually thought it was quite thorough, the way options were presented. And I think a lot of the risks were spelled out with hindsight, a lot of the things that people have raised. Oh, Mr. Sanad.
A few councillors are getting confused by the so I'm wondering whether we should just go with the pack page number, the big number at the bottom, and not my small page numbers, which are obviously, so we go with page 39. Yeah. 39.
No, apologies. I printed off a hard copy. I thought that would make things easier for me looking up and down, but actually harder. Apologies. Yeah, so just moving on to, this is item 2.1, and I have it on page 39. So this is the review the authority of the Cabinet to establish a URC, and was it in line with the Council's constitution, and did the report set out the risks, reward, pros and cons?
Madam Chairman, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It would be really useful if you could read the heading as well each time, then we can make sure we're on the right page.
Yeah, decision to create BCP Future Places Limited, Cabinet 26 May 2021, page 39 in the pack. Good. So, I mean, my view is that I think the reports actually seem to set out risks and considerations in quite a bit of detail. I don't think you could say that it was an inaccurate picture of what the plan was. That's just my reflection. What do others think about the way the proposal was set out and how it went through Cabinet? Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, thank you for that. I suppose I could make a comment about that if I knew who was in this inner circle working group, this magic inner circle. Who was it councillors or officers or a mix? I don't know whether Mr. Stannard discovered who was on this inner circle group.
Madam Chairman, with respect, could we steal away from that sort of verbiage? Can we keep to the facts? The inner circle magic group. I don't think that's appropriate. So if we could just keep to the facts, and if they do have a name, if they're a particular committee or working party, they could be named so. Thank you.
I think in this instance, the company was called Inner Circle, so I don't think that was meant in a derogatory. Magic working group. Okay. Did you want to pick that up, Standard?
I'm going to say exactly as you've said, Chair. Inner Circle was a physical company. It's not a metaphor for some secret group. No.
Do we know anything more about them to answer Councillor Andrews? Councillor Slade, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, yes, thank you. I think the piece that I slightly bothered about, which I think I was slightly bothered about at the time, was what the relationship was with Inner Circle Consulting in the first place and why they came about. I don't think we know the answer to that question. We know that they did the assessment about the different options in front of us. If you make the assumption you wanted to have a URC or another type of delivery model, these people did the assessment. But what I never understood was, why were they involved in the first place? And are we clear that they were truly independent, given what we know now with hindsight?
Councillor Phipps.
Just a comment really, because when I went through this, I did make a note about 2.1.4, which is the options appraisal. In hindsight, completely wrong by the look of it. So yeah, I think that that's quite valid to say, well, you know, how did this come about to be so, what I consider to be quite off the mark in a way. Yeah, just my comment on that.
Yes, I think my reading was also that it would seem very pushing a URC as the solution. I suppose that's what kind of consultants often do, is they push a particular proposal. I think there is a fair question there around why. But I do think it did set out, at least for councillors, it did set out the options, so they were aware that was, that, you know, that there were other options, and that was the one they were going with. Councillor Slade.
I suppose that, just to try and frame the question a bit differently, is, do we know what the exam question was? You know, when Inner Circle Consulting were appointed, are they an organisation that BCP Council contracted with on a regular basis? And, you know, what was it, a neutral question? Because I think the answers make it look like it wasn't, and if there is any documentary evidence that shows that it was genuinely a neutral question, that would build some confidence in the answer. And I think it might be useful for the committee to know that, if that is something we have available.
Councillor Butt.
Following on from Councillor Slade's question, we expect, don't we, a high standard with regard to who we contract with and who we speak to. So could I just ask the question, was due diligence undertaken? Because if we had due diligence undertaken and we have proof of that, then I think that answer Councillor Slade's question. Thank you.
I think we can make a note of that. I think that, I suppose one thing that did strike me is, did the administration at the time need to get Inner Circle to provide this? Is it possible that the administration at the time could have simply put forward a proposal to Cabinet saying, I want to do a URC, this is a great idea? And you know, would it really have changed things fundamentally if they hadn't gone and considered all the other options to this extent? I suppose my question is, was there anything to stop there simply being a proposal for a URC? Would it have changed anything if this was different? Not sure that's one that anyone could answer really, but that's my question at the back of my mind. Was it seems to be quite thorough in setting out the options and clearly pushing for one. You know, the paper could have simply just proposed the one, couldn't it? And I think that comes back to this question, that if the administration, who has the majority in full council, has a vision and wants to achieve it, that does tend to carry it at the end of the day, irrespective of the kind of quality of the consultancy advice. Councillor Batt.
Yes, I see your point entirely. We need to ask ourselves, perhaps, was this usual practice? Was there anything unusual in this approach, or is this the normal form of contract and the way in which we speak to outside partners or potential outside partners? If it deviated in any way, shape or form, or we have any evidence that that was the case, then clearly we need to ask further questions. But I think if we can satisfy ourselves that that was the case at the time, then we've rather answered our own question. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think you know, it's always with the benefit of hindsight. You ask, were the risks well understood at the time? And I do think risks were set out about the URC. I think you could argue that maybe they could have been made more clearly to councillors, but I do think the risks were set out there. And one of the attractions it sets out was the more flexibility around recruitment. If it had to operate exactly the way a local authority operated, then a large part of the point of it wouldn't have applied anymore. So that was kind of drawn out as one of the attractions of it. So I think that is relevant there. That councillors did have some sight of that. I mean, I suppose here is as good a place as any to ask if councillors have a view on whether the concept was flawed from the start. You know, I think with hindsight we could say that there are going to be challenges with acting like a private company but using taxpayers' money. That was always going to be challenging to pull off. You know, they're quite different worlds and different expectations, but I'm not sure that means it could never have worked.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think that's a question to be answered, because these companies have been set up in other parts of the country with varying degrees of success, and businesses do fail, and that's what happens. So I don't think that is a discussion point at this point in time.
No, I think that's fair. I think some of our discussions do come back to, and a lot of the public narrative does come back to this question of this tension between the private and public, the different ways of working. So I think it is relevant to say from the outset it was intended to act this way in this contrast. And I suppose you don't have to have a view on, you know, maybe it could have worked, as you say, there is others elsewhere. But I think it was clear that this was how it was intended to work as a structure. So I think we can kind of move on from this question about the structure in and of itself. Does that make sense? Am I being clear on that? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I'm just kind of wondering, looking at these different models, I wonder why strategic partnership wasn't perhaps as explored as much as the urban regeneration company. I wonder at this stage, is it possible that the people that were making the decision about which delivery vehicle may have had their view kind of affected slightly, because as a council we had a local strategic partnership a few years before that, so I'm wondering how completely impartial the decision making was around that.
I guess my reflection on that would be it doesn't have to be impartial, does it? If you're the councillors in the administration, you could have your personal view on what works and what doesn't. So I suppose that would be their challenge, is that they think URCs are better, I suppose, and they were they had the majority in councillors. Mr. Sanad.
Maybe I could just draw councillors' attention to pages 102 and 103 in the appendix, which is a slightly deeper dive of the options appraisal, which does also include a bit more about the strategic partnership that Councillor Armstrong's just mentioned, and why that is summarised in that table as not achieving the objectives that a URC would. So it's a bit of a deeper dive, if you like, in the appendix on 102 and 103.
No, I think that's helpful. I mean, I think, yeah, if the cabinet members had a view as to what they thought worked best, then that was likely what was going to carry the day regardless. But I suppose you couldn't criticise the piece of work for not looking at other options. But with hindsight, obviously, and with my personal views, I would not have gone with the one they did. Sorry, who had the hand up first? Did you have your hand up first?
Thank you. To be fair, if I'd been sat in a room with this in front of me, a risk register, and I was choosing an option like strategic partnership that's got 2 likely boxes, then that's a hell of a risky decision to make when the experts, and we have to assume in this situation without seeing the due diligence that Councillor Butt pointed out, that the experts have given correct information and steerage with the highly likely boxes under urban regeneration companies. So, you know, you have to go with the risk register. That's what you have these experts giving you consultation for, and why they get paid this money. So again, I don't think this is a question that can be asked now. You have to assume that the people at the time did the best they could with the information they were given, and that tells you very clearly that the urban regeneration company was the recommended option.
Thank you. Councillor Tarling? Oh, I think Councillor Beasley was next, actually. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. I think to understand this properly, we need to go back in time to the foundation of BCP Council. And partly this is a matter of capacity, it's also a matter of ambition. And regeneration is a very complex beast, particularly for a geography as wide as BCP Council, and one where the capacity of the council with its existing officers, their experience and all the rest of it, would be fundamental to whether there was confidence in the delivery of the ambition. And so a very complex situation, I think, requires a fairly complex solution. And in terms of creating a URC, which has been done very successfully in many places, many urban geographies, and that was no doubt one of the reasons why Lord Kerslake was appointed chairman, because he got substantial experience of delivering out of a URC. And without that, I just think we would have been treading water at best. The other options that are in there, some of which were adopted by the preceding councils successfully, were fine within the limitations that existed. But those limitations were eliminated with the formation of BCP Council, in the sense that we needed a totally holistic view of a number of different parts of the conurbation and a number of different areas of regeneration and development. And a URC is really the vehicle to be doing that. And you only have to look around the country to see that where URCs have been successful, they have delivered those long-term ambitions. I think the risk assessment that's in there is perfectly valid. If I, as a person with some experience of these things, were doing it, I would have been quite accepting of those conclusions, because they are almost obvious within the context in which they were working at the time.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, as previously stated, I work for a company that provide this advice on the services, and whilst looking at it, I've looked up the company Inner Circle Consulting, and lo and behold, a couple of their senior staff used to work for my employer at the moment, and also advise on URCs. I have no problem with the decision that was made about entering or setting up a URC by BCP. I think, you know, it's a vehicle whereby you can attract a skill set at higher salaries. As I mentioned before, I was interviewed by Future Places for a senior development manager role, and the salary that was being offered and discussed at the time was quite considerable. I probably wouldn't have gone for an interview with Future Places, except for the fact that it was a very, very good salary. So I did get a second interview with Future Places before getting rejected at the last step. And I've mentioned before, it's a matter of public record. And my position was discussed by some of the politically members of the board, and it was decided it wasn't appropriate to offer me the role. However, URCs are, and looking at the information presented here, is perfectly acceptable. And as others have mentioned, it seems to be it's a way of delivering projects, and that's not the issue. I don't have an issue with the setting up of the URC.
Yeah, I think that aligns with my view. I think that I wouldn't say that it could never have worked. It's from my political instincts, it's not where I would be more comfortable. I would tend to prefer, you know, increasing the staffing within house. But I would not go as far as to say that it would not have worked. But I think my reflection would be that if you were going to attempt a very cautious and prudent approach, might be the way you'd go about it. That would probably be my reflection on that. But I appreciate their comments. They wanted to increase the capacity, a more strategic view, and that was the recommendation provided. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. As our independent member so eloquently put it, we asked for an expert opinion and we were given an expert opinion. Due diligence, I understand, was done and the risk analysis was accepted. So I think all those tests, the markers which we were required at the time to look at, I think in the cold light of day, if we look at them now, although there will be cognitive bias, obviously, you know, as to what you may like personally, I think that you're quite right. In summary, this was perfectly acceptable. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
If anybody would like to make any final comments on that item, on the approval by Cabinet, should we move on to 2.2, which I have as page 44. So this is review the approval of the final business case by the Chief Executive and the inclusion of the information as requested by Cabinet. Anybody have any initial comments on that? Councillor Slade.
Thank you. So I think this comes back to the question, the continuation of the previous question, and that is, if I've got the timeline of this correct, somebody appointed Inner Circle to come up with the options appraisal. Inner Circle came up with the URC as the option that looked like it was green all the way down, and why wouldn't you take it up? They take it up, and then the council appears to have appointed Inner Circle Consulting to look at the council's regeneration portfolio. So I think the word cosy springs to mind, and I suppose my question is, what's that relationship? Where's that come from? And how sure are we that there wasn't an inevitability about this? And that really is just about seeking confidence that the appointment process of Inner Circle Consulting at both stages, both the first stage and the subsequent stage, was done through the normal procurement process and on a merit basis, and that there was no interference or, you know, personal involvement throughout. That I think is the only assurance, because fundamentally, if that was all clean and gone through a normal process, then this is a legitimate process to follow.
I think that's a really good question. And perhaps, Mrs. Sanad, if you might have considered this, I think it probably would be a matter of concern if the consultancy provided the advice to set up a URC and then was immediately the contractor to develop the business case for that. Whether that was all part of one agreement or whether there were two separate procurement processes. I wonder if that's something that has come up in what you've seen.
It's not an angle that I've reviewed to date, so I can take that away and have a look at that.
I think that would be helpful. Thank you. Councillor Butt.
Could I put that in context and clarify that? So Councillor Slade raised concern about procurement processes. So it looks like, did we have one, which was coterminous, or did we have two? And I think that would give some assurances.
Councillor Butt,
I'll say it again. With regard to Councillor Slade's comment, her comment was the normal procurement process undertaken, and how many were there, and were they coterminous or were they taken in segregation? I think that's the question we put forward, because if we knew that they were taken in segregation and were not coterminous, then that gives some assurances, I think, as to Councillor Slade's question. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Slade.
I don't want to be picky, but can I just ask for some clarity when that is looked into on the numbers involved? Because I recall at this same period of time, the procurement process that we follow has some thresholds, and at different financial thresholds, there is different requirement in terms of how many people are in the picture, who signs it off. And during this same period, you will recall a very public situation that we dealt with through scrutiny and audit before, where one organisation was receiving a lot of pieces of work, which when they added up, they crossed thresholds, but individually would not have ticked that box. So my question is that, given that these are part of effectively the same journey, that they don't collectively hit any thresholds, even if they don't individually do so. And that isn't a challenge in terms of the procurement team, because the procurement team would only have known what they were dealing with at the time they were dealing with it. But in terms of intent about future, was there a red flag at some point that should have been waved and gone, hang on, these people have had a lot of money? As I don't know the numbers involved.
There may be a recommendation in there around if one piece of work commissioned following off the back of the other from the same contractor, supplier. Mr. Sanad.
Yeah, I think we've rehearsed this in audit and governance in the past, and I think Stuart Bickle, who's the procurement manager, might have mentioned it last time he came to committee, but aggregation is a tricky beast because there's the reasonableness of, could you reasonably foresee that you were going to give extra work down the line? Sometimes, when, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, you said, oh yeah, of course you would, but on day one, you might think, well, it's a 30 grand piece of work, but and then because it evolves, the project evolves, so it is a tricky judgment, that aggregation issue.
Noted. Oh yeah, Councillor Slade.
I just want to make clear that there's no criticism of Mr. Bickle. It's just that point that was made around somebody makes a clear recommendation for a URC, and then the fact they've made a recommendation for URC means that you've then got to do a review of the things that would form the URC, and it's the same organisation that does it. That wouldn't be a decision made by Mr. Bickle. That would be a decision made by somebody else, but undertaken by Mr. Bickle, and that's the decision making I'm interested in, rather than the operational delivery.
Mr. Richards.
Chair, just for the record, although we just referred to Mr. Bickle, it wasn't Mr. Bickle who was the strategic procurement manager at the time. He is our current procurement manager.
That's helpful. We'll make a note of this, and that it might be something we can consider picking up, perhaps separately at A&G, perhaps following this. I had a question about the change in business case and the decision to move from the revenue-based funding model to the working capital loan model.
Can you just take us to where your question derivates from, Madam Chair?
This is still section 2.2, page 44. Well, it's the content on 45. Do you have a view as to whether or not here is an appropriate moment to talk about that change in decision around the funding model? Is here as good a place as any to talk about the thinking behind that move? So for context, this is 2.2.7. The initial decision record was for a revenue-based funding model, and then there was a change that instead they would move to a model where there was a working capital loan. So there were two separate business cases there. Could you clarify, Mr. Sanad?
Yeah, I think this section is talking about a revenue incremental growth on the revenue model, because originally the council set aside 1.75 million at the start of the project. That's referred to in a lot of the early committee reports to cabinet, etc. And then at 2.2.8, we're talking about, there's not enough money in the 1.75 million. We need more revenue. So there was an interim stage where we added more revenue budget, again agreed at cabinet and council because it was a big number. So that got agreed at council, and the revenue funding went up to 3.4 million from 1.75 for the 21-22 financial year, albeit not all of that was spent in the cold light of day.
Can I confirm that amount, that increased amount, was to be funded from reserves? That was to be funded from reserves, to my understanding. Fine. Financial resilience.
20.8 million.
Can't hear you, Nigel.
Sorry, it was to be funded from the Financial Resilience Reserve, which at the time stood at 20.8 million.
Do councillors have any comments on that item? Councillor Phipps.
On page 45, 2.2.9, got summary of financial implications. And I was quite incredulous when I saw the last line. That was expected when you're looking at what they're talking about investing, you know, require a further 3 million to be spent in 21-22, around 3.5 million in 22-23, etc., and 1.3 million per annum thereafter. They're looking at the gross development value overall, 2 billion. Where is that figure come from? Is it in some of the accounts or business cases somewhere? I know that one of the business cases anyway was it wasn't even in the public domain. So where has that come from? That is a huge amount, you know, and just it's like for me, just for me, it's more like more pie in the sky, you know. So where's the proof of that, or the?
Susanna.
Yeah, thank you. It is in the original business case report, so the Inner Circle report. It's their estimate if everything was built out at the end of, you know, end of everything, 2.2 billion, with 3,500 homes and other statistics within that.
Oh, you had a follow up.
Was that business case that was in the public domain? Was it then? It is out there. I'm quite amazed by it. That's all. Just seems incredulous, really. But anyway.
Councillor Tarling.
Having done a little bit of work with a company that's involved in a Green Deal, a company that's no longer in existence, can I just say that there's a lot of let's just say associated revenues and benefits that have capital values attributed to them that are not immediately evident what they are. You know, like air shows that bring in millions for hotels. They're sometimes very difficult to quantify, and you know, the well-being benefits that we put capital values against. So that 2 billion could be the happiness of all the children that are now in BCP, quantified into pounds, shillings and pence.
Pie in the sky.
Well, you say that, but couldn't possibly comment.
Councillor Butt.
I know that Councillor Tarling's just made a very good point, but could you reiterate? Because yeah, I'm sorry, just a shout. I really couldn't hear all of that. Thank you very much.
I'll précis what I just said, and that is that when you put in all the benefits of schemes, sometimes you attribute financial benefits to things that are probably slightly less tangible, and that's possibly where the 2 billion came from.
Councillor Armstrong.
I'm just thinking about Inner Circle. I'm actually looking at them online at the moment. They're, funnily enough, they're not mentioning Future Places as one of their case studies. I'm not laughing because that's not funny. Sorry, Councillor Butt. I was just laughing. So I'm just wondering, with regards to Inner Circle and why they were chosen, and ensuring that our whatever procurement process that we went through to get them, considering that the information that they gave us and the business cases that they produced or were part of producing was so critical actually to how Future Places was set up, the delivery vehicle, how it's going to be funded. I just want to be sure that the procurement process was on point.
Noted, and you've got that on your list.
I've got that on the list. I've just done a quick recce of the 2 billion is first mentioned in the 26th of May 2021 report. So if you go back to the table at 1.1 and click on the 26th of May, it's in that report there. where the 2 billion is first quoted.
2021, you said.
Yeah, May, 26th of May 2021. And the title of the report is Proposed Regeneration Vehicle Options Appraisal.
With my hat on thinking, could this not have just been done in-house? I do wonder with that extra fine, if they were willing to take that from reserves, what could have been achieved if that had been directed in-house? I suppose that's a counterfactual we'd never know. But I do wonder about the scale of how much was willing to be attributed to it out of reserves.
Sorry, yes. Your point is moot, but well made. We did have an assurance that this was all agreed by council. These funding measures. You said that 1.7 million went back and needed more with regard to revenue from the financial reserves, financial resilient reserves account, going up to 3.4 million, and that was agreed at council.
9th of the 11th.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. Yeah, 9th, 11th. So my assurance in that is that it was a council decision which was made at the time with the information available, and it was so agreed. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I think the point on procurement is important and is one that we should look into. I do keep coming back to this point there that ultimately, if the cabinet members, if the administration had a vision and they wanted to achieve it, would the report and the way they took it through cabinet have fundamentally changed that? I suppose that's my question. If councillors want something to happen very strongly, and they have a vision for a particular model, was that not going to be pushed through anyway? I suppose there's always that possibility. Acton.
Thank you, Chair. I understand your question, and it is a healthy question. However, as an independent person observing you all over the last 2 years, you've known me now, I can't help but not contribute on this by saying you have all got different political appetites towards risk and economy, and so if you've got that combination that have a preference for this kind of risk at the time when the future places come up, of course it went through. And if it was an option now, it might not even get discussed. So that's just par for the course when you have changes in administration and dominations. So really, it's not a. Hopefully that answers your question and addresses those elements from my point of view as an independent member, and long may you all continue to have those differences because it does bring good balance.
Thank you. Yes, I think that is I think that's my point is that ultimately if there is a political will, there's a political will, and we might have a different political will, but that's not to say that it was the wrong process followed at the time. Having said that, there may very well be some useful learnings from that exercise and how it was conducted. I think one thing I did want to note was that in the officer decision record, under establishment of the URC company, this is page 45, I do think it does set out quite clearly what the plan was for how it was supposed to work. Contract to be drawn up, staff to be appointed, initially interim, to be registered as soon as possible. I think it does give quite a clear direction as to what happened, and I think the following steps kind of implemented that. So I don't think you can say that the following steps could have been a surprise to councillors based on that. Interested in other thoughts on that. I guess the question is, did councillors get what it said on the tin? I suppose is the question. Was the setup more or less what they thought it would be at the time of the decision? Maybe that's something we can reflect on as we go through. Did anybody have any further comments on item 2.2? And as I should note, we can always come back at any point. Always happy to come back. Ms. Sannard.
Sorry, I was just ferreting away on some. So just reversing back to the procurement decision on Inner Circle. In the report to, again, to Cabinet on the 10th of March, again, in the table 1, the conclusion, the recommendation is the Chief Executive be authorised acting in consultation with the leader and deputy leader to procure and review advice from external consultants and to recommend for decision by Cabinet as appropriate. So what I'll do is I'll go away and check what that procurement process was, and maybe update that part of the report.
Thank you. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, just to make a correction on the Cabinet 29th September 21, minute number 55, about accelerating regeneration for investment in the BCP area. Councillor Broadhead then referred to development sites with apparently £3 billion of gross development value of regeneration. So it would look like either Councillor Broadhead couldn't keep track of the numbers, or he willingly misled the Cabinet on the actual, which might have swayed the decision to invest more money into future places.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Butt.
As an observation, it's quite a serious matter, as outlined by Councillor Tarling. I think we need to drill down into that, because was it an error? Was it a typo? What was it? And who, with regard to the information that was available, were people suddenly thinking, oh, it's a lot more than was said, it's gone up to 3 billion, or were they fully aware it was 2? Because I think that's quite important. So it's all very easy to say, you see something on paper and it says, oh, look, so-so said such and such, but we've got to drill down as to why that's there, exactly what was said. Do we have the transcript of that meeting so that we can actually hear what was said? And if so, how did that, or did that in fact materially change anything when the report would have clearly said 2? Did anybody challenge that further on? What actually sat around that scenario? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Can we make a note of that, Mr. Stannard, to come back
Noted,
to?
Yeah.
I note that Councillor Stephen Bartlett, who's joined us online, he made a comment in the chat just on the topic of setting up of the URC. He said, my understanding was that the need for the URC was born from a dissatisfaction of the Bournemouth Development Company model. The Teckle approach was considered preferable because in theory it gave the council full control given it was the only shareholder. So just wanted to put that on the public record. So I think we can ask ourselves, do you think we have what we need here on the subject of the setup, and whether councillors were provided with the information they need, whether the process followed was in line with the Constitution, and any residual questions on that, on this topic? Any comments? I think my perspective is that we have quite a lot of information here, and it was set out quite thoroughly. And I think a lot of the issues might come down to, with hindsight and our personal views as to what the decision should have been at the time. But we have some questions to follow up, so we can go back through those at the next meeting. Shall we move on then to item 3? The establishment and operation of BCP future places. So this is 3.1, is page 47. So 3.1 is to identify the process for the appointment of the company's executive and non-executive directors and other staff. Was an appropriate, open and transparent process followed? I think we know this is going to be a key line of inquiry. Would any councillors like to jump in first? Councillor Phipps.
Yeah, well, what can you say, really? At the end of the day, on the face of it, it looks like processes certainly weren't followed at all. How can you not even have, you can only have one candidate who'd already previously been offered the job, and then the person that offered the job was on the panel, or the interview panel as well. On the face of it, it looks terrible. Was the appointment even legal? I don't know. And then there are, if you follow on from that, and I think also the managing director was also engaged initially on an interim basis. That comes in at 3.1 here, on a certain figure of payment. I don't know how that was worked out, because it ended up being, was it £900 a day or something? Where did that come from? And, you know, so pretty much already got the job before he started. Then they'd been offered it as well. And then there was an interview, which was just part of the course. It was going to happen. I think it's absolutely, well, not just astonishing, it's absolutely dreadful. What sort of process is that? And then apparently after that, the other two directors or executives, as you call them, were then appointed quite quickly on recommendation from the then managing director. And it doesn't look good. I don't know, but on the face of it, it looks as though, you know, this job's for her mates or something. I'm not saying that's what happened, but it doesn't look good at all. So what was the process of that? I do believe one of those as well may not have been advertised, or was it advertised, or was only one other candidate? I mean, there's a lot of information here, but you said who wants to come in first, and I think basically on the face of it, it looks absolutely dreadful. And I am aware that there's stuff on the BBC and in the Echo, I think, about this already. And an email has just actually come in to me from a member of the public asking what the hell is going on about it. I mean, as I'm a councillor, I've suddenly received that, and I'm sure other people may be receiving emails about that as well. It's just this minute come in. So I'm shocked, and I think it's absolutely awful, and I'd like to know what we can do about this, if at all, or what do others think?
Yeah, I think you've set that out very clearly. I think we are all of a similar mindset there. I can't speak for others, but I certainly am. I think we need to spend some time thinking about this. I think it's a very big part of the piece. Councillor Slade.
Thank you. I mean, the whole thing is a complete farce. I mean, just reading through the minutes of that council meeting that happened in terms of the councillors' roles in this, there was also a request to include a member of the opposition within the leadership, the governance of this organisation that isn't mentioned anywhere in the report, which was refused by the deputy leader of the council at the time. But the bit I'm really concerned about is 3.1.9, which states, no, that's not the right, sorry, 3.1.9, where is it? 3.1.5, 1st of July 2021, the day before an interview, that the to-be managing director sent an email to the head of HR saying, I wonder if you have an offer for me to take a look at. Now, if I had a business and my head of HR received something before someone had even been interviewed that used the word offer, that would raise huge alarm bells that somebody has been given an offer prior to an interview. And I really want to drill down into why the whole process wasn't stopped at the point in time that someone had presumed to have got a job even before that they were interviewed. I don't know how you can, I don't know where you take it from there.
Councillor Andrews, you put your hand up before.
That's okay. I'm echoing what the other two councillors have said. That this promise by Drew Miller to Gay Mayhew of the role of MD, and obviously that's £150,000 a year before the extra slight health insurance. It was a predetermined employment arrangement. That was wrong. Then there was a contrived reverse engineer appointment. Mr. Stannard says the council would appear to have reactively acted to the leader's apparent offer of employment. That's paragraph 3.1.6. This incorrect process was revealed in an email to the chief executive dated the 14th of June 2021 and describing the 3-page appointment process for the MD. The crucial part reads, the final stage will be a permanent offer of employment to the MD of the URC, which I believe, name redacted, has already been received from Drew. There will have to be a form of selection to justify the offer and position, and this is work we'll have to do. But I do believe we can make it safe for scrutiny purposes. Now, that email is on page 105 of the report pack. The report also indicates that Drew was impressed with Gail and wanted her to work for the council via Future Places, but no references were obtained prior to her appointment. That's paragraph 3.1.31. However, she was interviewed 2nd of July, and the job was not advertised. There's no other candidates. The interview panel comprised the aforesaid Councillor Broadhead and Mellor, and also Councillor Mark Howe. However, it's quite revealing in paragraph 3.1.10, Councillor Howe is effectively quoted by saying she lacked experience in an MD role in financial management and planning and in operational delivery. He was outvoted. However, only a few days later, after her appointment, Mrs. Mayhew recommended Craig Beavers for the post of Chief Operations Officer. That's £145,000 a year, and James Croker for the post of Strategic Engagement Director, 100k a year. That's paragraph 3.1.17. The Chief Executive's opinion was that these positions need to be openly advertised, paragraph 3.122. Indeed, they were, but only for a week on the BCP website, nowhere else. Mayhew and Beavers have worked together previously, as Mr. Stanton notes, paragraph 3.119. Beavers and Mayhew did not provide references. That's paragraph 3.132. Regarding Mr. Croker's point, Mr. Howe does say that he's had received reports that Mr. Croker was friends with Drew Mellor, saying they probably knew one another from Bournemouth Rugby Club. Basically, in my view, well, probably the wrong person was appointed, looking back with the benefit of hindsight for Future Places. Then that person engaged others who were not the right fit for the job. They probably would have been excellent in another role, but not doing this regeneration. They had several projects to start with. They should have started with several projects. However, the list grew and grew until it was nearly 20 as the administration loaded up their workload. And the rest is history. You know, it got off to a bad start.
Thank you. Acton.
Thank you, Chair. I gauge by the feeling in the room that we will resonate with Councillor Phipps on the content of 3.1, and that therefore further investigation is required, further evidence is required, because we're in danger here of joining dots in the wrong places. And I'm quite concerned that maybe it's very easy to make assumptions and make remarks in this arena that might be somewhat negative towards the characters of people who aren't even in this room and were previously employees, the MD and other people in Future Places. So perhaps we shouldn't chat about that too much, because we don't want to say anything against their characters when perhaps there's more information available that Mr. Stannard just hasn't been able to access to date. But I think we could probably all agree 3.1 is one of the items that needs to be investigated further. So we discussed when this scope was prepared that there would probably be elements that needed to go to a further level of investigation, and I would suggest that this is definitely one of them.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. It's a couple of questions with regards to the recruitment. Would it be, because the company was a TECL company, would that provide some flexibility in terms of recruitment processes? I don't know, I'm just wondering. But my point is, I'm just gobsmacked, really. Is it usual to be paying people such eye-watering amounts of money for consultancy work? For example, like in excess of £900 a day, plus travel expenses, private healthcare, and then once in post, paying someone more than the Prime Minister to oversee a regeneration project. I just think it's astonishing. I'm also wondering, why did BCP need to take legal advice? Was it BCP taking legal advice for itself, or was it on behalf of the MD? We've already asked, like, where are the jobs advertised? Well, it seems like they weren't, or the MD's post wasn't. And why did the MD remain as a consultant until the employment offer was firmed up? And is this because the company itself lacked the infrastructure to actually employ staff? I don't know. And I think in terms of the TECL arrangements, I mean, just thinking about what BCP staff were facing at that time, they were facing uncertainty with pay and reward. There was like increasing cost of living crisis. Many of our residents using food banks to survive and still are. This is just incredulous. The sums of money that people were paid, just incredulous and just not in keeping with what the, you know, the environment outside there in the world of BCP residents.
Councillor Phipps. Councillor Butt.
Yeah, I'm disappointed at some of the verbiage I've just heard. I really think that we do need to stay on message. We need to use impartial, impassive language, because we're not here to judge anybody. We're not a court. And if this is deemed to be so serious, then perhaps a court should be looking at it. And I think our independent members' comments were very well made. So I think we all need to quarter what we're saying. Can we please not bring some quite prejudicial phrasing into it, which I've just heard from the previous councillor, where we're bringing other matters into it and comparatives, which sound very emotive. You know, if we all had £2 billion, you know, would we spend it on our residents to do something good, or would we create this company? So let's not use that silly emotive language, because it doesn't help. So I'd really just remind members that we really, to get to the nub of this, we must be impassive, we must be impartial. It's difficult when we're seeing information in front of us which gives some form of steer, but we really need to treat it very carefully. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
So as part of this, I would like to know, one of the questions is, was the process of recruitment of the managing director and the other two, or any of the, all of them, I suppose, actually legal, but mainly the managing director and the other two executives? Was that legal? And like you say, there was some legal advice. Can we see that? What was the process, and was it right? I'd also like to know, who set these salaries as well, because you're absolutely right, they were eye-wateringly high. And when you look at the overall figures, that over 3 years, this company spent 7.25 million or thereabouts in spending, like turnover, whatever. But they spent then on consultants 3,146,000. Just so what, you know, basically they were just employing others to do a lot of work there. When they were being paid these huge amounts. It just doesn't seem right to me, and I think we ought to be, perhaps, whether we can delve into that more as to where did these salaries come from? Were they the right amounts for what they were being asked to do? And if they were being asked to do the jobs, and they were supposed to be, you know, very high caliber people that could do this job, why were they having to employ all these consultants to pretty much do the job in a way for them, part of the job for them? So I'd like some information on that, or whether we can look into that as well.
Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, to answer Councillor Armstrong's comments, I mean, the figures are actually probably the market rate for the person they've recruited. I'm not going to go into personal rates and charge rates, but you know, I know that other companies in a similar vein charge similar sort of monies for this sort of work. The question is do you really need a Rolls Royce to drive around to the shops and pick up a couple of pints of milk? The answer is probably no. You know, we recruited you know, if you look at some of their CVs, you know, some obviously very highly experienced, well qualified people, and certainly two of the names mentioned are ones that I've known in the industry before. Obviously, Lord Kerslake is a very well-known name, and you know, but do you really need that level of appointment? So I think that the question isn't necessarily on the individuals concerned; it's on the decision-making process of the board that got us there. And as Councillor Phipps just said, you know, who set the salaries? And certainly from my personal experience, I mean, the salary that's been discussed with me was, I won't tell you the figures, but it was at least 30% higher than what I was getting. At the current time, I was actually working in central government in a government department where I was actually getting paid double the rate of the civil servant that I was working with, because they couldn't find a civil servant to do the job that I was doing. So if that gives an indication of the sort of monies we're talking about, then you could say that's probably at least 60% higher than what you would be paying a BCP officer to do. Now, there's reasons why you employ people in the private sector and why you employ people in the public sector. And I don't want to talk about it in front of the officers because it's slightly disingenuous to talk about it, but it's the decision-making process on what set that level of directorship and the pay and reward, and the sort of rather profligate approach to spending it seems to be that Future Places had, and that's not just the appointees; it's the board that were involved in that process that I think is probably the deeper issue we've got here.
Bernard.
The process of defining salary grade was a council decision, and it was based on role profile and job evaluation comparable with the corporate directors in the council, and there had to be obviously a differential between the MD and the COO, and there was a pragmatic 5,000 difference there. So it was a process that the head of HR went through, which was a job evaluated and a role profile. And as a count, if we were creating a post in the council, the process, it followed the same process essentially.
Thank you. There's a lot of points raised there, and I will try to navigate them. I mean, I think that when I came into this investigation, at the start, I felt that the staff of Future Places was somewhat of a side issue, and they were just hired, got on with their job, and some of the structural issues or the larger issues were and around the council were the issue. But certain of the former Future Places employees have insisted on their importance to understanding what happened, and we've taken that on board, and we've said that we've asked for their input, and we have said that they should provide information. I think that the hiring of the two individuals is a really big part of understanding what played out. I think I completely take that on board, which is the point that they raised. And Councillor Beasley, you've said that from the very start, that their role has been very important to understanding what happened. And I am very shocked the more I understand about the choice of appointment. And I think you're right. This isn't personal at all. But to Councillor Butt's point, I understand why Councillor Armstrong would be so emotive about this. They are incredibly high salaries, and it's very difficult to not be emotive about this when you look at what was achieved. So I think we want to try and reconcile this. In fairness, the whole purpose of setting up the URC was to be able to pay salaries that BCP couldn't pay, local authorities couldn't pay. That was one of the attractions, was to be able to recruit talent. So I suppose, given that, would it be surprising that the salaries would be much higher than we would want to see within a local, that we would ever see in a local authority? So I suppose we should ask ourselves that. It's, to my mind, it is shocking, but is it surprising, given that's what was agreed and voted on? But I do think that question of how the salaries were landed at is relevant, and we need to give that some thought. In terms of the role, the hiring, again, I think it's very shocking. I don't know enough. I haven't been a councillor long enough to know whether or not it's usual or encouraged for a leader of the council to make a job offer outside of any process. I don't know if that's the sort of thing that's done. but it appears to be what's happened here. It appears that the then leader gave a job to an individual, and then the pieces were expected to be picked up for that. And I find that really quite staggering. So that there's that. In terms of what we can do about the process and how appropriate that was, I think that's something we could ask to be taken away, to think about, and then for the next meeting we can be informed as to what would need to be done to get a question on that question about how, lawful or not. My limited understanding, obviously not a lawyer, is looking at the Public Sector Equality Duty and the Human Rights Act. It's not clear cut. It's not black and white on the process that should be followed for a tackle company in a URC. I think, to my reading, there is interpretation there. So I think it might be interesting to find out what should have taken place there. I think we can all agree what we think should have happened, irrespective of whether or not it was lawful or not. I think we can all agree that a fair and open process should have been followed there. Were you seeking to come in?
I was only going to make the point that I think I've referenced in the report. I was going to make a recommendation along the lines of the council needs to decide in advance, so any prospective employees know the position and do they want to work in an organisation where the council is, at what level does the council set how far down the structure, in other words, because the chief executive's officer decision record clearly says the council's only involved in the appointment of the managing director. All other appointments are the managing directors to make because it's the company. So is that right? Does the council want to do that in future, or do we want some say in the structure down? And it's only fair to tell whoever's being employed at the top, that's what we are going to do before they accept the job, because, yeah.
Nigel, I just need to clarify something here, though. Because the company sat outside the council, I know it was wholly owned, but it sat outside the council, and the MD was appointed, happened. At that point, when the MD appointed the next person, the governance for recruitment was not in place. That came afterwards. So the process wasn't defined at that early point in the company. Okay, that happens quite a lot in private companies. I'm not too disturbed by that. Well, the disturbance is that this is not ideal in a council-owned company. That's where the problem is. So really, the problem can only be resolved by making a recommendation that any business that is created by the council, wholly owned by the council in the future, must have that procedure and governance from day one.
Yeah, sorry. What Sam said is that will be my recommendation, that the council needs to decide in advance what its expectations are on recruitment and how far down the structure that expectation goes. All the way down or to a certain level.
And what day it starts on. It starts from the inception of the business.
I mean, I think, again, we come back to this tension between the idea was for it to act like a startup and compete in the private sector, but ultimately it was owned by the taxpayer. And there was that fundamental conflict. I'm not sure that we could ever have been happy with the salaries that would be paid by a startup, a regeneration small company competing in the private sector for salaries and bonuses. Would we ever have been content with the salaries being paid, given it was owned by the taxpayer? You think that potentially yes. Councillor Darling.
Yeah, I think a company that's got an £8 million investment behind it is one that, why not spend the money on its key people? But if that £8 million public, then maybe you've got to apply the proper governance and scrutiny to it. That's the challenge here. There's nothing wrong with an £8 million company that's got an £8 million guarantee or benefactor saying we're going to spend the first 1.5 million on, directors' salaries. That's absolutely fine. But, especially if they're going to be making £3 billion, so I'd be borrowing them £1.5 million myself to invest in that scheme.
Councillor Slade, did you have your hand up?
So I think it is about the fact that the salaries were being funded from borrowing from the council. I think that's the fact, because if you look at other organisations that the council has a relationship with in an arm's length way, we don't look at the detailed salaries of BH Live that we birthed, or the salaries within other sort of organisation, Tricuro or PHP when it existed. We don't go into that detail. It was the level of debt at the start. So I think the forward looking is to be clear as a whether the first year needs to be different, that actually there is, do we need to be very, very clear that someone is a council employee until a certain point in time. There was always a real tension for those that weren't involved at the beginning in the terms and conditions and some of the added benefits, things like private health, that the staff within this organisation were getting that were not available to members of council staff. And I recall that being conversations within officers saying, well, hang on a minute, I'm doing a good job, I'm working hard, this isn't right. So, I think that we need to have some real clarity about the expectations that we should have as a council on behalf of people and on behalf of how it compares to the staff that are working on staff contracts within. I don't think we can ignore the impact that this had on the rest of the staff, including some very senior members of staff who have been paying a lot, earning less than people who were controlling much smaller budgets.
Mr. Richards.
I'm not going to respond to the last point. What I am going to respond to is the fact that we just need to remember in the first stages of BCP Future Places, it was a revenue funded model. So it was just funded exactly the same as we would have done in an in-house regeneration team. It was charged to revenue. The development into the borrowing model came at a later stage.
No, I think that's helpful. I also think I would like to look further into the qualifications for those in those roles, as that's something that stood out for me. Is on what basis Drew Mellor felt it was appropriate to give that role, and I think that is something that is relevant to understanding the context. I have done my own looking on the internet, and I'm not aware of relevant experience that would put you in a position to manage an £8 million regeneration company owned by a local authority. So I think there's a really big question there about that. So perhaps is that something that you could take away to provide committee members with a little bit more on the what information was had before the decisions to recruit? Councillor Butt.
Yeah, I'm becoming increasingly concerned now. Whilst obviously we want to be accountable for the public for anything that this council does, we really are getting to some dangerous realms now. It's been touched on by our co-opted member. We are not a court of law. We're not here to look behind things. We're here to look at the facts. So can I please remind people, can I also please remind people, which our co-opted member has done, that, if we say individual or character or give the title, but can we please stay away from names? Because we may be at some considerable risk of putting the public to a detriment if somebody decides that they do wish to take this through the judicial process. So I think we need to be very careful. It's difficult because we want to get to the nub of it, clearly, and there's nobody in this room that doesn't want to do that. But the way in which we approach it is critical. And I'm sure that our chief executive will not be wanting there to be huge court cases that we're having to face for a slip of the tongue, which is all it takes in law. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, that's fair. I think and I also have a note about the £900 per day figure. as to whether or not we want to look in a little bit more around to the how that was landed at. So the amount that was agreed to be paid on a daily basis for interim consultancy work until the salary began. It's in the report. In the report, just a question of how that figure was landed at, because I don't think that sat with the salaries discussion that you mentioned already.
Is that relevant?
Is it relevant? Councillor Tarley was saying that is not unusual as a market rate for for consultancy. So presumably, well, okay. So the question is was there some research done as to what the market rate was at the time in order to award that amount of money? That's what you're asking, isn't it? It's not the amount itself. It's just, was there some comparison, sort of like, were 3 quotes obtained, that type of thing?
It's section 3.1.13, the rationale for how that figure was landed at. I think it is tied to the question of the appointment, and we don't know about those conversations that happened. We know that an offer of employment was made outside of the usual framework. So I think it would be useful to understand what other discussions were made around that time, and whether they were in line with the usual process. Pause there. Councillor Armstrong.
It's a question about commensurate. So I understand at the time that commensurate would have been providing a lot of our consultants and supporting the council with recruitment. How were they involved? And if not, why were they not involved? And was there a financial impact of the council going around a process, having their own process and not using commensurate to make those appointments? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. Acting Management Officer.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to be clear, Chair, the instructions you're giving to Mr. Stannard in how he responds to the recruitment process in particular. So councillors will have responsibility for any searches they may do, but the extent to which you're instructing Mr. Stannard to work on the basis of the facts he's established already that's freely available, contrasted with going down a particular a way of searching or trying to prove something else, because he's trying to find that balance that we're not having a second recruitment panel, and it's just making sure we're doing this in an appropriate way, not suggesting you weren't, to make it clear exactly what it is Mr. Stannard's coming back with and how he's going to get that information. So that's important for the minutes, I think, and to know he's clear.
Yeah, to be clear. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Carney. I'm tending not to agree with you. Probably taking Sam's point of view, the 900 a day I actually think is good value for. You pay a lot more than that, certainly with. Shouldn't really say much. Sorry, I think £900 a day is good value for the level of appointment that you would be paying. In my experience, if you were paying a management consultant, you'd be probably paying a bit more than that. I think by going through, as our monitoring officer has said, the recruitment process again doesn't really get us anywhere. I think that the issue that we have is the allegations that have been made about cronyism and jobs for mates that previous councillors have made and been made in the press and other areas. And I think that's more the issue. We have to trust that there was a recruitment process of some sort, and we may not agree with that process, and was it followed. But the individual to go through CVs or LinkedIn profiles and sort of reassess individuals with the light of view of hindsight, I think doesn't serve any purpose, and as pointed out, I think opens us up to the certain legal challenges that I wouldn't want the council to be exposed to. And I think, as mentioned by an independent member here, we don't want to cast any aspersions on the individuals concerned, whether they were actually up to their job. The bit of greater concern is probably what comes on later, is did we actually get value for money out of what, we bought a Rolls Royce to go and get the milk. Did we actually get the milk?
Councillor Beasley.
Well, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Tarling and the independent member, and I think that daily rate in the market, that isn't to say it's not comparing like with like if you're comparing with council employees, because there are lots of other differentials within there and differences. So it's really important that we don't stray too far into that, I would suggest. As a charging out rate for that level of expertise, it doesn't seem unreasonable to me in the marketplace. And I am, like Councillor Tarling, I would have probably anticipated it being slightly more than that. So I have, though, a real issue about determining some of this stuff in detail in the way that we are, outside of Mr. Stannard's report, and we don't know how that corroboration works. We don't know where all of this information came from. We certainly do know, though, that it didn't come from the two senior officers of the company, the managing director and the chief operating officer. And that was the point of my email that went out earlier today. It was very definitely not to sidetrack our discussion. It really definitely was not to do that. It was to see a level playing field. It was to warn of the risks that we might encounter if we didn't deal with this in the way that I have suggested. And that's been raised by others around this meeting. And I think the chances of us straying off the central point here and into a field of litigation at times this evening have been raised quite high. And I warned of that in the email. People don't have to take any notice of anything I say. I'm usually in a minority of one on this council, but I do have some experience of these things, and I can only tell you what I think. What I would also add to that is, so I don't know the provenance of what is in the report. We know some of it, but we don't know of all of it. We don't know whether all of it actually is evidenced, and I suspect that, having read it, some of it has to be termed to be conjecture by whoever contributed to it. But I'd always remind anybody looking at future places that we had both before it was incorporated, big input from the then chief executive, and once it was incorporated, the sole director was the chief executive, the former chief executive, and after that he became the shareholder representative, which in and of itself is quite proper, but he would have sight of and input into every aspect of this if he so wished. So we haven't heard definitively whether he did or whether he didn't, but we are here sort of conjecture-wise assuming a number of things. And what really concerns me is that we haven't got the input from those two senior officers of the company alongside the shareholder representative to put us straight on what actually happened. And until we've got that, it's very difficult to take this process to a conclusion, I would suggest. But it's also very easy for those outside of here to make their own supposition and conjecture as a result, which may take us even further down the wrong route. And I feel absolutely passionate about this being conducted in an orderly and proper way. And that is where I've got these really grave concerns that I expressed to members of this committee earlier today by email. And you have got now a lot of input from those two senior officers of the company in front of you. You will have time between here and the next meeting, no doubt, to read them and to digest them and to ask questions of Mr. Stannard around them. But what we haven't got is their ability to come and present that to Mr. Stannard, because we ruled that out at the very start, and it's in his preamble to the report. And I hope that that can be changed, because we won't have an outcome to this that is fair and equitable otherwise, and people will go off assuming all sorts of things, and that is what we must avoid at all costs, Chair.
Madam Chairman.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you. Yes, I iterate and support Councillor Beasley's very sensible approach, avoiding any judicial processes which might come upon us. We do have evidence from our past chief executive, which is right and properly given, etc. but we don't have the opportunity, we haven't got that evidence as is put forward by the other officers. So if that's a proposal, Councillor Beasley, I would be more than happy to second it, that we actually put that in train so that we can hear properly from the officers of the company. Thank you.
Well, I would certainly be happy to second that, but I would add what I think you've put in your email, which is that this committee may have a number of questions of those two people, and indeed others outside of the council. And that, I think, is the subset of the first part.
It's a case for natural justice, isn't it? It's not a case of jurisprudence, so we do need to apply that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is helpful to discuss. So from my perspective, I think that we do need to hear their input on a number of key questions. I think that we need to be clear that it is answering specific questions that we want. I never intended for this to be a platform for many individuals involved to set out their narrative of what happened. So I didn't think it was wise for the investigation to start off with seeking the views quite broadly. I think what the approach we've taken to set out what Mr. Stannard has in-house and available, and then on the back of that, as a committee, we can agree what questions we think we could do with answering and how to answer them and the right people to ask. So I am of the view that one of the very sensible next steps on the back of these two meetings is to go away and ask for clarification on a number of points which Mr. Stannard is not able to get in-house. So I'm very much supportive of that approach. I'm open to different ways of doing that. It could be that certain individuals get an extended interview and are asked a number of questions and can set out their positions. That's something that we could decide. We could decide to invite them to come and speak to us. I'd be very happy, open to that. So I think this is for us as part of our next steps to very much consider what would be useful to add to our understanding of the narrative. So I do not dispute that it's useful to have various inputs, but I just think we need to be controlled as to what we ask and of who. I think you came in first, Councillor Tarley.
Yeah, I feel we're being dragged back to the previous discussion, which was the scoping exercise, and I think the original call of motion was for a full independent sort of judicial review type inquiry that some councils were asking for. And I think it was pointed out at the time that if we were to go at length for people or ask people to comment, that we'd then be open to providing potential costs and cover for sort of legal counsel and stuff like that, and we didn't want to do that. This was an investigation to be carried out by an internal audit team, and with that to approach those officers and former officers that were in of the council and make inquiries of the records, the scope. And I fear that we, by taking on board what Councillors Butt and Beasley have just put forward, I think we're extending the scope back into that realm again. And I think that's going to lead us down to a hole. I've already seen the internal costs. We can all see the internal costs. They're quite considerable. Those costs are going to go very, very much higher if we find that former employees of Future Places are requesting legal advice and counsel and submitting us with that. We're going to be spending a lot of money, and I really don't want to be throwing good money after bad. For my view, I think that we take on board the points made, and they're relevant points, but I think we need to get to the end of the process and find out, is it really relevant? What are we hoping to achieve by this internal review and audit? Do we want to excoriate, individuals and point out, the failings of either council officers or former directors of Future Places? What's the benefit of it? Do you think our electorate are going to be happy with us spending £500,000 on pointing fingers? I don't think so. It would make me absolutely mad if I have to answer that on the doorsteps in a year and a half's time, saying, well, you spent all this money investigating a so-called failed company when it's already cost us quite a bit of money to close it down, because we decided it wasn't, it wasn't value for money, or this administration decided it wasn't a value for money. and as a council we voted on that. I just really don't want to get pulled down back into the realms of going for a full sort of legal inquiry, which will just cost us, potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds. Thank you.
I mean, I'm sympathetic to those concerns. I've spoken to external audit as well in the process, and I'm very mindful of the approach taken and being proportionate. So I don't think we need to have the discussion on next steps now. I think we should have that at the next meeting and what we do next. But I don't think that it's mutually exclusive. I think that it is possible to ask for the input on some key questions without it turning into a much larger piece of work. So that I do think there are options there. Councillor Butt.
I agree with you, Madam Chairman. I think I obviously understand the fear that you have, Councillor Tarling, with regard to that and allowing costs to rise, but I don't see it on that scale. I think however we approach the Chief Executive who gave his evidence, we need to apply those same processes so we have a balance, because at the minute we have an imbalance with regard to natural justice. We have information from the Chief Executive. We don't have that comparative information from the officers of the company. I think that's the balance, and I certainly wouldn't want to be incurring huge costs to do that. So we need to find a way around that. Thank you.
On that, though, I would dispute that there is an imbalance in natural justice. I would say that in the usual course of events, the Chief Executive would be sitting here and able to comment. I think there should be a difference in the way in which we incorporate the reflections of the Chief Executive at the time, who was answerable to us as a committee in the usual course of events, and previous ex-employees of a company. I do think we should differentiate. Narratives are useful, but there are many, many narratives which we could include. And the absence of any particular narrative does not mean that what we have is incorrect or not robust. So I think that whilst we may want to seek input on particular questions, I don't think that means that every narrative of every individual who is affected by events needs to be incorporated for there to be natural justice.
And I agree with you, Madam Chairman. I'm talking about the other balance, the yin and the yang, so to speak, and it's done on at the same value, at the same level, so we get that yin that we're missing at the minute. Thank you.
And to be clear on those individuals, we have written to them and invited them to contribute information. The former managing director did send information to Mr. Stannard, and he has included it in the report. So, for example, to that point about there was work in train that was not accounted for, well, she sent that to Mr. Stannard, and that is in the report. I think what is important is not to. I think they have the opportunity to send information, and we would welcome that, and that position still very much stands. Councillor Phipps.
You're asking for specific questions, and I think I did mention this before. I would like to know a specific question then, whether we can look into whether the process that was followed to appoint the Managing Director, the Chief Operating Officer and the Strategic Engagement Director, the process was lawful or correct, or it was a correct process, and whether it was lawful. That's what I would like to know, bearing in mind there were no other candidates. One of them was obviously, in the evidence is there, offered the position in advance, etc., etc. Exactly what is in the report. It's factual, it's sat there, and there's emails to back it all up. So I would like that as one of the questions, please, that we can have an answer to.
Perhaps we can make a note to look into how that might be possible, and discuss that at the next meeting. Exactly.
Following on from Councillor Phipps' point, following on from your point that you've just described, Nigel, I already sent in 5 or 6 questions just on this point. Are you happy just to take them from the email I sent in rather than repeat them at this point? Thanks.
My same question, I have questions, and I'm sure others do. Can we submit those questions and then see if they're appropriate or see if they can be put, rather than have those questions iterated at this moment in time? Thank you.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. I think we should remind ourselves, page 8 of the agenda, paragraph 24, today over £25,000 has been spent on this investigation, and let's say we're halfway through it. So you're going to double that figure. What you've got to remember is internal audit is there to keep this council on an even keel. And Mr. Stannard and his team are being drawn away from an important function of the running of BCP Council, getting us out of the big hole that the new administration inherited, and doing a good job. And we need to get this investigation on future places done and dusted as soon as possible. And I certainly would not agree to going back and thinking of making an external inquiry, because the monitoring officer that we did have, sadly, she's no longer working for us, did give some estimates of the figures of doing that, and it was astronomical figures, which Councillor Cox is online here. There is no money down the back of the sofa to fund that sort of thing. All those coins are being found already and spent.
Madam Chairman, could I just come back on that? I'm confused now. I didn't put a proposal forward for an external investigation at all. I'm sorry, but with regard to finding out truth and what has happened, then regrettably money cannot be a bar. Now, obviously we do not wish to squander, but if it's a requirement for some extra monies, no matter how small they may be, to apply those to get to the truth, we must do that. But I'd like it put on the record, I haven't asked for an external investigation. We had that discussion. It is about asking the officers to give the 50% or the other side of the argument that we haven't heard. We've got all these emails, but they're incredibly difficult to plough through. And if we have some targeted questions which would then get us the answers we're looking for, such as the one that Councillor Phipps has raised, I think that is the prudent way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, to be clear though, we haven't made a recommendation at this stage. The way I envisage it working would be that we consider questions as we go through, make a note, as you have done, of where we think we could do with learning some more. We make a note of that, and at the end of the next meeting, we have a discussion about how best to achieve that, and further steps from there. So there is no decision at this moment as to what we do next. This is a process for us to go through and identify where we think we still have questions, and no more than that. I have plenty of questions on the recruitment process, and I think that some of it I will not get to the bottom of without asking the individuals concerned. Why various people were hired, on what basis, why go with particular evidence. I think that is useful to understanding what happened, but again we can decide at the next meeting what we want to do with that. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. And this relates not just to this, but I think relates going forward in a pragmatic way of responding to this, because there's clearly some frustrations about us potentially going round and round in circles and no one ever being satisfied. And that is, there are clearly some things which people feel were done wrongly. I've been very clear where I think things have gone wrong. In many cases, these things, we are protected from these things happening in future because we undertook a significant change in the governance of the various organisations and companies that we're involved with. That was undertaken from 2023 through to this year. So I wonder whether it would be practical and pragmatic to look at almost a recognition of whether this was best practice, good practice, whether there may have been some flaws, and actually whether it remains a risk to us or not, because in many of these cases they are no longer risks. We need to say them out loud as what they are, but if they're no longer risks to us, we can, we can deal with the fact whether they should or shouldn't have happened, but then go, right, okay, it can't happen. But some areas there is a risk. If you go back to the question about the procurement of the consultants, that is a risk that could rear its head in another place. So I think there's what are we going to do with this to make this good value for money, however much more we choose to spend on it, that actually we can use this going forward. And I think that pragmatism of, is this still a risk to us? If not, acknowledge it, respond to it, move on from it, close that door. If it remains a risk, how do we then de-risk it? And I think if we address those questions from that perspective, we might actually get some value for the whole organisation, not just from this.
Mr. Stannard, when you're doing this section of Part B, can you set out the recommendations and as well make a note of what has changed since that time? So what has already been done in light of the what was it called? council-owned bodies shareholder report?
Yes, scope 0.8 is a aggregation of lessons learned, i.e. the ones that have already been through committees and ones that the council's implemented, and any others that might come out of this. Yeah.
Good. We are halfway through section 3. I think now is a good time to pause for a break. We can return to any of the, if you want to resume section 3, we can pick that up afterwards. But I think at the end of section 3 is 3.1 is a natural break. So should we break for 10 minutes enough? Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm ready to pause the live feed. Thank you to anyone joining online for your patience as we had a break. So we are now picking up on going through the sub-scope items, and we are at section 3.2, which I make to be page 51 of the public document, 52 of the public document. And this is to consider the adequacy of the governance arrangements put in place by the Council for the operation of BCP Future Places Limited. Before I go on, does any councillor want to jump in and speak to this section in particular? This is 3.2, the adequacy of the governance arrangements put in place by the Council. Councillor Phipps.
I'm actually looking at a little bit further down. I'll just head to that. But there's 3.2.11, and it's about the commissioning contract agreement, which never actually happened. And then there was supposed to be a resources agreement, which I don't think happened either. And there is some correspondence or stuff in here. Is it 3.2? Oh, hang on, I'm trying to move this along. 3.2.21, where officers were actually, commissioning team were quite concerned about some issues and were clearly of the view that FPL were being commissioned to undertake projects outside of the commissioning plan, but we didn't have a commissioning contract in the first place. The whole thing seemed to be a bit of a disaster, and I think I'm not going to read it all out because it's all there in front of everybody. And so where was the governance in all of this? And I think that's one of the things we're here for. It seems to have gone completely out of the window, like a lot of things obviously have with this company. I think as well, as far as governance is concerned, in this type of company, the council had decisive control. Is that the case? And Future Places, the managing director, etc., had day-to-day control of it. So the overall governance of all of this was down to BCP, I believe. Certainly as far as having a commissioning contract in place and a resources contract, and they never happened. I think questions need to be asked as to why, and I'm not saying who was responsible, we're not supposed to be doing that, but what happened to the process? What went wrong here? I just want to throw that in now.
Madam Chairman, before we move on with that, we're assuming that something did go wrong. We're assuming that there were errors, omissions, etc. Again, can we be careful of verbiage, please? We're getting dangerously close. Thank you.
Could I just add that there's supposed to have been a commissioning contract and resources agreement, and they weren't there. So obviously they should have been there. So it's all very well saying what you just said, but they should have been there and they weren't, and that is a fact.
Can I just say, Mr. Stannard, did you want to come back on the question about operational control versus directional control on the, the point Councillor Phipps made about it being, you didn't have anything to add there, that's correct.
I don't have anything to add. Councillor Phipps is correct. And, the commissioning contract, not to be confused with the commissioning plan. So the commissioning plan was there. So the commissioning contract is like the nitty gritty of, when, at what points do you make payment? And the sticking point, I believe, was the point at after an outline business case had been approved, what were the then stage payments after that? Now, Future Places, quite rightly, in my view, didn't like the idea of we only get paid when we produce a full business case, because that could be quite a long period and incur a lot of cost. But it's what the council originally agreed in the working capital loan principle, capitalisation principle, and there was a view that should be revisited to say that puts too much risk on Future Places, and the council should pay at a staged process through the point from an outline business case to a full business case at some points within. That was the major sticking point.
Councillor Slade.
Thank you. Can I go back to the beginning of 3.2? And that is that, so I'll make the point now. It's not relevant for this, but I remain a director of Seascape Group, which is one of the council's companies. Seascape Group, along with all of our other organisations, have councillors' involvement in helping to direct those organisations. We don't have day-to-day involvement at all. You know, we meet 2 or 3 times a year and we are told what's going on, and we ask questions and we scrutinise in the way you'd expect. But Seascape, along with the Tricuro Board, Bournemouth Development Company and all the others, are all cross-party. Every one of them. And so I think when you look at the adequacy of those initial governance arrangements, what was unique about this organisation that meant that it was set up without any opposition involved? If it was right that it should have councillors' involvement, the question is, should it? But if it should have had councillors, why was this unique in not having it? And if it shouldn't have, which, you know, it goes on to say they shouldn't have had day-to-day operational control and it should have been officers, why was there only one officer? So, you know, you only have one officer rather than several officers, and you only have one party governance rather than cross-party. So I don't understand why this was set up the way it was set up and why it was different to everything else that the council had ever done.
I've got to be careful because this is my view. I'll be clear. So the principle of non-executive directors was very much in the forefront of Future Places. So it was only ever a temporary solution for initially Graham Farrant to be the sole director, and then for Drew Miller and Phil Broadhead to go on as the 2 extra directors to bring it up to 3. The recruitment of the non-executive directors, independent non-executive, was slower than anticipated in my view, and therefore what was probably thought originally of being like a 3 to 4 month bridging period ended up being a year, and that's I think that's how it was.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. I was on overview and scrutiny at the time that Future Places was set up, and I do recall Councillor Slade making that point that on these councillor directors for Future Places, there should be somebody who wasn't part of the administration. I think it was even suggested there should be 3 councillors, so there was some balance there. And I do recall he went to a vote, and no, there were going to be 2 directors from the administration.
Section 3.21 and 3.22 at the top of page 52 does address the point. So it was considered by overview and scrutiny. It was moved by a councillor, and overview and scrutiny took a vote on whether they would recommend to cabinet. You know, obviously the results of the vote are there on 3.2.2.
So I'm supportive of the recommendation if you plan to make that about having cross-party groups if this is going to go ahead. I think I should play. I want to say devil's advocate. I want to speak from on behalf of Phil Broadhead if he were here. When we met earlier in the year, I said I think the way that the governance was set up was shocking and not how it's supposed to be done at all. And why would you not do it properly from the start? And he did say that, in fairness to them, the direction from Cabinet was to do this quickly and move quickly in line with the big plan, and that they think that they did quite well to get it up and running as quickly as they did and get Lord Kerslake and get other experienced non-executive directors in place within a year and a half. So his perspective, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but as he said at the time, was that he felt it was in the interest of getting things moving, setting up a bank account, setting up a ledger, setting up to be able to then do that proper recruitment process. Now, as I said at the beginning, if I were going to be undertaking an exercise like this, I would probably want to be taking a very, very cautious approach, which is probably at odds with that need to do things very, very quickly. And I would probably prefer if everything was up and running as you would like it to be from the start. But I think that is what he would have said was the rationale. So I suppose it's a question about whether or not that was a prudent approach to take. You know, was that a pragmatic, prudent approach at the time, or was it avoidable? Councillor Slade.
Can I just come back and say I think that that is a reasonable view to take, but we are holding the trust and the money of the public, and therefore transparency and trust matters more. And I think that when we're deciding on these things going forward and learning lessons from these things, is that the transparency question has to be there, because yes, it wouldn't have made it any slower if the governance had been set up to have either cross-party or more than one officer. That wouldn't have made any difference. The meetings could have happened in just the same way, and in deciding that at that meeting it would have taken no longer. So I think that that feels a little mealy-mouthed, but you know, we are where we are. But I don't see that it would have made any difference to the speed of process. I do accept that getting Lord Kerslake on relatively quickly was a good thing, and obviously having him in place then brought other people in. But yeah, we have to agree to disagree on that.
And to be clear, that isn't my view. I'm just trying to reflect that is the comment we received at the time. But yes, I completely agree with Councillor Phipps's points about the commissioning contract and the resource agreement, and perhaps that's something that we can pick up as to whether or not the you know what happened there. I think we've got the council's position of where council officers thought things stood. It would be useful to hear, I think, from the Future Places staff where they thought the hold up was, so we can put that on the list, unless others disagree. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask through you, Mr. Stannard, whether and what was the role of the former chief executive in this process, later to become the shareholder representative, and the council's commissioning director at the time. So during the life of Future Places, there were two people in that position, and I assume it was the earlier one, obviously, because it's at the start. And I wonder what role they had played and what evidence has been collected from both of those people.
The Future Places board minutes, of which Chief Exec was obviously there initially as a director and then as a shareholder representative, had a standing agenda item, progress on governance documents, and there was regular discussions and at the board, you know, the board, what is the hold up, who needs to get involved to unpick the hold up. So I think the governance within the board was there. The resolution of the issues was more complex, and they had to happen outside of the meeting with officers around, you know, how are we going to unpick this? You know, what are the stages, you know, in the example I gave earlier, what are the stages that BCP is prepared to pay, and does it tally with what Future Places would expect? And I think that's where the disagreement was and why it took time. And ultimately, I think there was a prioritisation as well, because obviously we hadn't got to a full business case position, and therefore it was a problem in theory and not in reality. Yeah. And in terms of the resource agreement, which is what does the council provide Future Places, there was a schedule, but there wasn't a specification, if you like, behind it. So, you know, in terms of, you know, what does Future Places get from legal and from accountancy and from, you know, what is the tangibility of the work that those areas were providing? That wasn't there. It was just a figure. So again, that was agreed in a board meeting in terms of the eventual payments per financial year. And again, it was a prioritisation thing, I think, around, well, we're providing a service, they're accepting the service, and yeah.
I have a question on scope creep, because it comes up in 3.2.20 that the council's commissioning team became increasingly concerned around January 2023. And I think what would be useful to understand is how should that have been managed? So if there were extra requests for work, if they were coming from the council, or if they were coming from councillors, or if they however they were coming, how should that scope creep have been managed? You know, where would it sit, the responsibility to push back and say we're not resourced for that, or if we have to do that, then that's going to slip, and where the responsibility for that should lie, how that scope creep risk was managed and should have been managed. Is that something that you could comment on?
I've got a view, but it's not substantiated by fact. So if members want to hear my view, I think schemes have like a natural evolution, you know, and in the original business plan where we started off with 14 schemes, you know, I'll use the BIC Arc Winter Gardens as an example, which was scheme 2. It started off as scheme 2, but then we had a 2A, a 2B, a 2C because of the natural evolution of the project. And I think the issue for the commissioning team is how was 2A, B, C coming about? And, you know, the inference from their words is that that was coming from some councillor position. But yeah.
I mean, you can imagine how that would happen with extra getting excited about a project and saying, well, let's look into this, let's look into that. Saxon.
That probably moves nicely on to my question, which refers directly to 3.2.21, page 56, if you're still all with us. You use the 3 words, presumably by councillors. Is it possible to add a question to your list, Nigel, as to try and find out which councillors and also which projects those councillors commissioned, so that we can establish that there was no conflict of interest? Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong at the last committee added 2 scope points around boards or groups that influenced Future Places in the council, and one of them was the Big Plan Delivery Board. And I think the Big Plan Delivery Board was one of the vehicles where the projects may have been discussed and where there was, you know, these natural evolutions occurred.
Andrews.
Yeah, picking up on that query on paragraph 3.2.21 about Future Places being told to do things outside their commissioning plan. I was going to mention this later. I mention it now because it links into it. In paragraph 4.5.4, page 71, the COO attended a meeting in London with the leader of the council and the external advisors on the Beach Hut sale and leaseback deal. So that's one example of Future Places being pulled left, right and centre. Oh, apologies, sorry. Thank you, Nigel. So 81, did you say? Yeah. But paragraph 4.5.4.
Was there? I didn't want to follow up on that one. So my sort of related question is, I think fundamentally, if there is, so imagine Future Places are providing services for their client, which is BCP. If the client makes more and more demands and kind of wants more and more and more, I would have thought it was the responsibility of Future Places, their board, to manage those client demands. And push back and say, well, if you want that, fine, but that's going to slip, or we need more resource for that. So that's why I'm quite interested in this, how this is supposed to work from a kind of procuring services model. I'm not sure that asking for more and more projects in and of itself is concerning, so much as not being able to manage those requests as they come in. That suggests to me to be just not managing that relationship adequately. Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, just picking up on that. So am I understanding this correctly about the requirements of a TECL company? That it's, yeah, obviously wholly council owned, that it allows local authorities to award contracts without a competitive tender, provided that there are two legal conditions being met. One being that the council exercises a similar level of control as over its own departments. And the other one, which may kind of link with what you're talking about, is at least 80% of the company's activities are for the council or other public bodies it controls. But just looking at the basic governance principles, I mean, it sounds like there's issues about having the clear shareholder oversight, the reserved matters for council, they weren't approved, so around pay, bonuses, borrowing, asset sales. Queries about, is it operating within an approved business plan, or is it reporting regularly, is it transparent fully in its decision making, financial management? Just that in itself really makes me question, you know, was it fulfilling its responsibilities as a TECL company? I'd wonder if there's more in your report, or that you found out that demonstrates that, because if it's not meeting its TECL responsibilities, are there not some legal consequences that would need to happen, or have they already happened?
Madam Chairman, could we have where that's referenced, please? I'm finding difficulty referring where were you, Councillor Armstrong?
Oh, sorry. Actually, Councillor Butt, it was a general observation based on what's coming up in the conversation. So it's not particularly referenced against a section in
so
point
you were
three,
posing questions rather than stating facts.
Yes,
thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can necessarily answer that here and now. You know, it's a wide. You know, there are pockets throughout the report where it's in. You know, there's specific items. You know, shareholder agreement for it. So the shareholder agreement was agreed by the council with reserve matters in it. So the 40, 43, 45, can't remember how many reserve matters. The point about reserve matters is considered in the report later, and it's more around the wording and what do we really mean by the council, because it wouldn't be, in my mind, full council, because we would just say council, and it wouldn't be by definition a council matter anyway. It would have been a cabinet matter. So I think the wording the council in future needs to be brought, you know, we need to say, what do we mean by the council? Is it the shareholder representative? Is it full council? Is it cabinet? Is it some other entity? But it wasn't clear, it just said the council. And that was a governance issue for the council, because obviously people have said, well, my interpretation of that is full council because it says the council. And you know, in reality, it wouldn't be full council, because some of the reserve matters are big issues, but some of them are quite, you know, in the grand scheme of things, rare and not particularly. So it would be a cabinet matter. So yeah. So I think we need to be. That's one of my recommendations going forward. Is what do we mean by the council, and do we need to change the wording and be much more specific?
So I think that matter about that point about reserve matters, I think we need to return to that. Maybe the discussion of bonuses is the best place to discuss that, because that's where it really plays out, isn't it?
Which is the next
Yeah. I mean, my observations are that the comments made by the council's commissioning team set out in 3.2.20, they sound very sensible. In this needing KPIs and criteria linked back to the commissioning plan. And I do wonder if this comes back to this point about ultimately the council and the taxpayers are going to want to be seeing progress and seeing evidence and deliverables. And there seems to be a disjoint in what was expected there in showing what they were doing and how it was going. So I think that's quite a key point is why was it that the council didn't necessarily feel like it was seeing the progress being made on those projects? Councillor Butt.
I think that might be very much down to custom and practice. I mean, I know that I'm very guilty as a councillor where I can't go through the right channels, you know, report it or whatever it might be. I might just ping an email to a strategic director and say, help. And bless them, or the monitoring officer, the chief executive, and they will come directly back to me. So I very much bypass the accepted protocols, but through my passion or wish to have something resolved, I've gone over and above where I should. So I think some of that might be down to that, where there is this juxtaposition and people jockeying for position and people jockeying for their project or whatever it might be. So I think we need to temper that as we consider this. Thank you.
And I think it speaks to this kind of fundamental issue, I think, around the needs of BCP. What does the council want to be seeing for its money and for its progress, and the kind of the vision that they had. The way that the whole ethos was around the idea of patient capital, and the stewardship idea, and this having a different interpretation of value for money. It's thinking in a different mindset to what I think council or councillors often want to be seeing when judging how these things are going. Okay, on that 3.3 then, I think, shall we move on? 3.3, the adequacy of the governance arrangements put in place by the executive directors for the day-to-day operations. Any councillors have any comments on this item?
I think, Madam
Sorry,
Madam Chairman, I didn't.
Miss Acton.
Just possibly one for the recommendation list, actually, Nigel, in 3.3.3, and there's the list of policies, and you see they look to have been provided by Purple HR. They smack, as a business owner, I can see that those policies have probably been generated by literally pressing a button rather than thinking through what the company really needed, because in a business of that size you don't legally require everything that is there. So it's the recommendation would be is what do you adopt that's appropriate, or do you just adopt everything that the council has so that it's one and the same? Obviously taking the whole thing would become more expensive to run. Thank you.
it's important. I think my recommendation is set out at 3.35 there, where I think we need to do more than that, because if we are, you know, it's a tech company and we are meant to exercise decisive control, we need to ask ourselves, why as a council are we allowing policies that aren't the council's policies, in my view, and we should do that in advance. And therefore, once again, at the point of recruiting staff, the staff know that they will be expected to follow council, and if they don't like that, then they don't have to apply it, and so on. So I think we as a council need to decide that, and we need to decide it in advance.
Councillor Slater.
Can I just question that a little bit and saying, so on the one hand, the people who work for this organisation can have contracts that don't pay any attention to council. You know, we can give them benefits that they wouldn't have if they were working for the council. We can pay them salaries that are nowhere near the pay scales. So surely it comes back to, if we're going to have policies that are based upon council policies, that suggests that the council has a responsibility to those individuals. If they have a responsibility, then I think it's almost like dipping in. On the one hand, you can have the same HR policies, but it's okay, you haven't got to comply with everybody else not getting the same pension deal. So either we've got to have one or the other, haven't we? Either you go all in and it's all council, or it's not. This feels like one step in and one step out. I can understand why on the setting up of the organisation, this organisation starts with, this is a pay scale, a set of policies, and that once it's actually off and running, they could change because they've then become a company. But at the start-up point, if you're going to have council policy, you've also got to have other council rules as well. Otherwise, I don't see how anyone will know where they stand.
Councillor Butt.
Yes, Councillor Slade rather shot my fox. There is, there does seem to be some confliction here. Which is it? And whilst I see, you would want all our staff to be absolutely clear on what they're supposed to be doing, what they can materially rely on, I think there's a difficulty that sits around that. I think there's another step that needs to be taken. And I'm not quite sure how you would do it or what that would look like. But I see the requirement there for our staff, although because any sort of arm's length management, which is the way I look at future places, we've abrogated from that, haven't we? But it's clear as to how we look after our staff in that regard. So I think that there is definitely some disconnect there that we need to put right. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it comes down to this point about it's acting like a private company, and the taxpayers are going to want to get comfortable with that. We can refine that recommendation maybe at the next meeting. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to look a little bit more carefully at that. And I'm trying to correlate that in my mind with other issues where either we've set up companies, we've set up partnerships, or perhaps we've outsourced something such as BH Live. And what we do at the start isn't necessarily how that will end up once they are truly arm's length. And it's very difficult to keep a grip on that and to actually make those decisions on behalf of that enterprise. We shouldn't be doing that, but by inference we would be doing that. And so it is, I agree to a large extent with what Councillor Slade said a moment ago, in as much as it is either one thing or it's the other. It can't be a bit of this and a bit of that and let's hope it works in terms of which parts we're going to grab hold of. And I have in mind, for example, local government pension scheme. So were these employees entitled to become members of the LGPS? No, they weren't. And any pension arrangements, therefore, would need to be made by Future Places Limited, whatever those might have been. I don't know what they were. Equally, when we set up, say, BH Live, separate from the then Bournemouth Council, we did so in a way where obviously TUPE applied, and that was fundamental, obviously. But we then gave guidance around admitted body status as far as those employees were concerned. But that did not mean that in perpetuity any new employees would be members of the LGPS. They could have been, with BH Live being an admitted body, but I suspect that they will have made decisions that don't show that consistency. So I think we just need to be a bit careful about how that works in practice. And we in BCP, because of inherited models, have lots of examples, some of which may have worked better than others.
So I think we should pick up a recommendation on this topic at the next meeting, but I think we could give it some thought as to refining it. I think, you know, if you're going to do something like this, you have to make sure that you get the benefits of that model and not constrain it to the point of it being ineffective. But equally, we do need to have some clarity around what we would want to do there. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. It's a comment, or it's a question actually, with regards to 3.3.1 on page 58. So again, it's BCP Council stipulating the technical company status, control, etc., etc. It's the point at the bottom. I'm just wondering, Mr. Stannard, if you could just clarify where it says the council's financial regulations were required to be adopted. Were they adopted or were they not?
Yeah, absolutely, they were adopted. Formally agreed through the board and taken through. I can't remember whether it's the first board meeting or the second board meeting, but absolutely they were.
I mean, section 3.3, 3.4, and 3.5. There's quite a lot of overlap in them, and 3.6, isn't there? On just kind of how it ran. I think that what you have here is thorough, but it very well may be that there are other lessons that could be learnt from how it was run on a day-to-day basis. I want to be kind of understanding of the fact that it was quite a new company, and startups take some time to embed a number of practices and good working relationships. But it does seem like there was some misunderstandings between what the council expected and what Future Places expected. I think that does come through. Any comments on this? Should we move on to 3.5?
Chair, are you combining or
Well, I'm wondering if for the sake of
3.6?
I'm wondering for the sake of the rest of the discussion, we could look at 3.4, 3.5, 3.6 together, and just say sort of open it up to general comments on the running and the operations sector.
In that case, 3.6.2, which is on page 65, reads, but it seems it was left to Future Places to interpret that and to apply it to the projects listed. So that comes back to the point that you were making, Chair, about the level of management and understanding, and gives us the trigger to ask Mr. Stannard if he would drill into that further to see if he can establish if anybody was actually taking responsibility, because it seems to me that if the customer, in this case was the council, BCP, was being flaky about dates and priorities, then Future Places should have taken responsibility and taken the lead in terms of management. Certainly as a project manager, I would expect that to take that role, or expect somebody else to take the role if they were appointed, or vice versa, but without understanding what the agreed relationship actually was, it's not something that we can comment on, and it is a question I think we need more information about.
So if we did want to have more information about how that relationship was set up and what the expectations were, is the only way to get that from asking the individuals involved? Do we think that might be the only way to get that?
I was going to say that, Chair, because I think I've exhausted my routes of, and it's a question for those that had those instructions, or yeah.
So it might be that having a bit more information about the understanding of the relationship and how that dynamic should have worked may be a useful addition there.
I'm terribly sorry, Madam Chairman.
Don't worry.
My phone is just going on a frolic of its own. I'm going to go outside and call it back.
Don't worry, don't worry. Well, I'm going to propose that we wrap up at the end of this section. Well, I'll suggest it to others and see what others think, but I'm conscious of the time. So yes, I think that section 3.6.3 is that I think relevant to the point I made before about this stewardship approach, which is by definition a slower paced delivery model, and there's a fundamental tension there between that model and the kind of need for demonstration of how it's working and the quick wins mentioned. And I'm not sure how that could be overcome. I think what was set out by the commissioning team as some suggested ways of presenting the information, that might have been helpful, but I think that establishing that and those expectations from the beginning seems to be missed. Do we have any other comments on section 3? I note for section 3.5.11, I think it is worth noting that there were the outline business cases and the full business cases that were provided to the council, but the former Future Places MD submitted the list of ongoing work that was in train as well, and that is here, shared in section 3.5.11 and 1.2, and it is gratefully received. And I think it does illustrate that there was an awful lot of work going on outside of those the projects that were initially commissioned. You can see that there's a huge amount of work, and I do note the comment at the bottom of 3.3. Mr. Sanad has a footnote on the hard work of the staff. So I think you can see there's a huge amount being achieved, or a huge amount being done, but it says councillors did not have a true understanding of what exactly was being achieved. I think that point is made there. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chair. So if I could bring you to page 61 at 3.5.5, and this is about the provision of monthly management accounts to the council. And there are, I know for a fact there are some issues about how this got changed. It wasn't changed at the behest of the company, but what I think we would benefit from would be to ask that question of the chief operating officer and or the managing director to give the answer that I have seen elsewhere. I think that would be the right way to deal with that this evening. And I know I don't generally want to go back to an earlier item, but at the same time, it does occur to me that the issue of what I think you or somebody has referred to as mission creep, which has come back into there as the volume of work, I would want to hear from one or both of those company officers how that occurred and what the progression of that was during the lifetime of Future Places. Fundamentally, to find out where the impetus came from, because one can make all sorts of assumptions as to whether that's good or bad, but without knowing how that was triggered and why those reports generally were kept in draft and at whose behest, I think is something that would be quite instructive to us. So if those two could be picked up in terms of referring back, I'd be grateful. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, the things being kept in draft has come up a few times, and it's something that I don't particularly understand the risk around it. Simply because in places of work I've worked, it's quite normal for pieces of work to be in draft until they've been through the final governance. Quite simply, someone senior wouldn't want a piece of work going out of their department if it was written by somebody junior without them having seen it. You know, for me, it's quite normal for until a piece of work has gone through this governance agreed for it, it would be in draft and should be taken as such. So for me, I don't quite see the why that would be unusual. Councillor Beasley.
I don't think that's the reason in this case. I think the reason in this case is because it's a public body, and it's about whether it can become public or whether it can't. And I think I'd want to know, for the reasons I've just stated, what was the position of the company in that, because it's dealt with in part in the report, but it hasn't got that corresponding information.
I'm happy for it to be added to the list. It could be both. It could be that it would be normal practice anyway, but that is a consequence of it. But we can add that as a note. I mean, what I think would be useful for this list of work in train, if we could have it highlighted as to where the conception of it from. We can see what came from Future Places, what came from councillors, what came from the commissioning team. But that, I imagine that would be very difficult. Councillor Slade.
So I am trying to recall back several years, and I don't know whether Councillor Bartlett is still listening, but it was not an uncommon situation for us during our scrutiny of various matters at this time for us to not be able to see things because they were in draft. It was quite a common response, was we can't share that, it's in draft. And I suppose a question to ask as an organisation is, yes, there is something about something going into the public domain. Yes, there is something about commercial sensitivity, but there's also something about the organisation as a whole being able to provide the checks and balances when something's draft and not hiding behind the word draft. And in what cases should the word draft be a block? We have exemption. That's something we're allowed to use to exclude the press and the public. But the word draft was used an awful lot over a period when Future Places was in operation. And I hope it wasn't used as a smokescreen. And I think there's possibly a recommendation about how and when we use that to prevent the wider body corporate being able to access something.
Councillor Butt.
I've got a question that comes out of that. So the verbiage of the word draft, I mean, that's generally that something is substantially on paper, which or unsubstantially on paper, but we have something on paper of which people want to have further contributions to tease it out and to make it something which is workable. So is it that it wasn't available to everybody within that context, or, you know, if it's confidential, then there is a group of people who can see it, isn't there? If it's draft, was there ever any occasion where something was draft and then it was deemed to be that particular meeting or conglomerate of people who had access to it had to keep it in confidence? So I think that's quite detailed, but I think that's important, because if we are going to find the derivation of when draft may or may not have been used for other purposes, because that seems to be the question we have, certainly not the accusation, then I think we need to ascertain that. Thank you.
No, I think that they're all fair points, and it's different for different organisations. I mean, some organisations, a piece of work can't leave a particular team or director unless it's been seen by legal and signed off by various people. And whereas that should not be a bar to councillors seeing what they should. So maybe a recommendation might be along the lines of clarity over access and, you know, certain routes agreed as to work that has reached this stage should be accessible by councillors, if not the wider public. That sort of thing could potentially be set out. So I think we should definitely pick that up. So I am conscious of the time, and the whole purpose of splitting it into two was to make it more manageable. And I sense we might be flagging a little bit and not keen to tackle the expenditure section. So what do other councillors think if we were to kind of adjourn now and pick up at the next meeting? Would you be supportive of that, or would you like to carry on a bit longer? Councillor Nova.
Yeah, I just want, well, if you are going to finish off, I just wanted to say something, because I'm subbing here this evening and I have been patiently listening to everything all night, and I've read a lot, if not all, of this stuff. And I know you were saying that people will be invited to give their assessment at the end. So I thought, seeing that I won't be here again, I might take the opportunity to give my assessment. Otherwise, it seems like I've been asleep all evening. Would that be okay, Chair?
I'm happy with that. I think we're all going to give our contributions, so I'm happy for you to give
That's
yours
lovely.
now.
I wasn't sure how quickly you would wrap up,
But
so
on
I
the
wanted to get in
basis
there.
basis that this is, you've seen part A and you accept that there's still part B to come, but your initial reflections would welcome them. Councillor Talley.
Yeah, just before Councillor Nanova gives her summing up, which would be lovely. Just to make a point that we did all see the financial information prior to this meeting as presented, and I thank Mr. Sanoff for taking us through it, although there was no commentary and discussion on it. I think that's just for clarity and making sure the public know this, that we have already seen this information, so it's not as if we're just skipping it or parking it because it looks like it's the meatiest part of the subject, but we did all review it prior to this meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Novo.
Thank you. Well, my assessment is really only based on what we've gone through tonight, and obviously I was party to the financial discussions last week. So my thinking is that a regeneration company in itself was probably a good idea, and the work done by Inner Circle seems thorough, although there were questions around why this particular company was chosen. But when decisions were made around recruitment with no apparent checks and balances or due process, this is a red flag to me. It may be perfectly normal, but hiring friends is very likely to have caused conflict in the workplace and questions about whether they were the best people for the positions. This may also have contributed to many of the decisions being made later being politically driven. He who pays the piper calls the tune and all that. And if the politicians chose the directors, then the directors were answerable to them. This could have contributed to many of the issues that followed, especially with no proper governance in place. When I say issues that followed, and I don't want to get picked up on that because someone did earlier on, I mean spending vast sums on the most expensive consultants and architects in the UK, if not Europe, without any project being delivered. Future Places Limited were juggling very many projects and should have prioritised and directed their energies, I think, towards one or two deliverables. And I think most people would agree with that. And it achieved at least one win. It appears that they didn't have a clear direction or strategy. That appears to me. We've been asked all evening to be careful what we say. But if I was a resident watching at home, I would want those sitting on the committee here tonight to be very direct and call out the decisions that were made that we think were wrong. Otherwise, there's not much point in being here. And I think it's unfortunate that we cannot speak to employees of the company, not directors particularly, as often it's the lower ranks who really know what's gone on. We must not give the impression that it's all very normal for a public body to allow one of its arm's length companies to spend over 7 million without having targets and showing results before it was given more and more public money. I don't think this would happen in a normal private limited company situation. There would be questions to be answered at every stage. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think there is as good an opportunity to pause as any. I think that we will pick up between ourselves when the best date for the follow-up meeting is. We've got a possible
Sorry to
date in
interrupt
mind.
you, Madam Chair. I'm so sorry. I just need to think very carefully about what Councillor, I always have difficulty pronouncing your name, forgive me.
Nanova
has just said to us. I think we need to be completely clear that it is the councillor's opinion, of which she's entirely entitled to, but I would hate to see some of those statements have made are fairly stark, fairly salacious in a way which is could cause issues in the public domain. I would not want to see headlines around some of the things that were said as facts. So as long as we understand that they are your opinion and conjecture, based on what you've heard today, which is fair enough, and there are many, many questions which come out of what we've heard today and what you've said, but we can't have them. My concern is that that is not direct issues. The issues are that these aren't decisions today. And part A very much depends on part B. So I'm not going to say anything about my assessment. Maybe you've given your assessment because you kindly substituted today and you're not going to have another opportunity. But I just wanted us to be very mindful that what we heard from our councillor here was her opinion. I suppose what we're hearing is everybody's opinion. You're listening to mine on what the councillor's just said. But I think it's very important that we are mindful of that so we don't err, and statements made passionately and honestly and made as to what you feel absolutely acceptable, but that doesn't make them facts, and we need to be very mindful of that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. In my view, I think Councillor Novo did make it very clear that it was her personal reflections on what she's seen today so far. And I think we want to make sure that we are being robust and thorough in this investigation, but we also have our opinions and we can't shy away from that. So thank you for sharing them, and I hope we will all share our opinions having looked at part B too. So we're going to close the meeting. I think there's just putting out another public, for anyone watching, there a public repeat of the invitation for anyone who believes they have information that would be relevant to us. Please do send it to the lead investigator. You're welcome to send it to committee members as well. Any information that you have, anything that you believe is incorrect, please send as a matter of urgency. Anything you believe is false, please do say so. But it's a plea for any information that you have, do share. And if you're concerned about sharing, whether or not you're able to share it, be in touch with the acting monitoring officer and say, this is what I'm unsure about. So please do. We are very keen to ensure that information is included. So we will close the meeting there, and we will resume the second part in hopefully late October, a date to be confirmed, so as many of us as possible can attend. Anything else to add before we close? Thank you very much. Good evening.